The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Hi, I'm Laurie Haynes, CEO and co-founder of Shirar, and I'm really excited to tell you that we are going to be raising funds for Shirar again. After a successful raise in 2023, it's time to scale.
We hope that you enjoy the pitch deck and the financial model. Any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us, and we can't wait for you to be part of Shirar.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
We also tap our great resources from Bloomberg BNEF, formerly known as Bloomberg New Energy Finance. They give great industry research on power, transport, industry, buildings, ag sectors, as well as how to navigate change within this energy transition, and they look at it from a business and finance lens. So joining us now is Enrique Gonzalez, Bloomberg BNEF, head of U.S. gas research, and we're going to be talking about gas. Now, what's interesting about gas is that we make a lot of some hay about U.S. oil exports, but in actuality, it's U.S. gas exports in the form of LNG that is a huge transformational part of the energy story here in the U.S. Where do we stand now, and where do you think we stand once President Trump takes office?
Yeah, so as mentioned, the U.S. is the largest exporter of LNG in the world. And in the short term, we have a considerable amount of new capacity coming online. And that was bound to happen regardless of whether we had Trump or Kamala in office. But yeah, we have Plaquemines and the Corpus Christi Stage 3 expansions coming in this December or early next year. And then the Golden Pass LNG terminal as well. So giving us more than 7 BCFD, 7 billion cubic feet per day of new export capacity out of the U.S. So further consolidating that role. And then where the change could be more significant is in the medium term with the terminals coming later this decade. And especially with these discussions of Trump lifting the DOE non-free trade agreement permit pause. Because this is a key permit that the terminals need to be able to reach their final investment decision. And there's a few high-profile projects there, such as the CP2 expansion from Venture Global, and then we also have a Sabine Pass Corpus Christi expansion alongside other projects that are targeted for them.
So basically, if you're not exporting LNG to a free trade agreement country, then you're no longer allowed to do it. But many said that was like an export thing that they were doing that really wasn't going to hold, that it was just an election thing. So that's what we're referring to. So that would really help get a lot more investment in there.
Is the expectation in your world of natural gas that a Trump administration combined with a Republican-controlled Congress, this is going to be the time to get stuff done, whether it's a pipeline or a refinery or anything?
You know, going back to the idea of the LNG terminals, it's definitely, you have more support to get these projects done. I think moving to the idea of pipelines, interstate pipelines, that's there needs to be more change. It's a bigger conversation. But it is, there's definitely more momentum than we would have otherwise had.
So to that point, and it's a good one that you make, because a lot of the gas that we have is in Appalachia, and it's really hard to get that gas out. It's in the Northeast, you don't have a lot of takeaway capacity, and you do get a ton of gas from also shale production, so within New Mexico as well as Texas, so there is that. What do you think we're going to be able to do in terms of getting pipelines in to get gas out of Appalachia?
Yeah, so I would say that's not my subject matter expertise, the policy behind the pipelines, but I think there is space to have more discussions about what can be done to get some more gas from.
But if we don't, do we wind up getting a glut at some point of gas because there's just too much and we can't get it out, therefore gas prices here in the U.S. kind of really sink?
Yeah, and when we've already seen this happen, especially this early November when the weather was pretty warm. We've seen, Appalachia can't really send more gas out. There's not internal demand in the basin. And then we've seen producers actually curtail production because the prices have dropped below the level they need to continue producing even from existing wells. And they're well below the break-evens in some cases for new wells. So we've already seen that have an impact in production in Appalachia. And as well in other parts of the country, you have the Haynesville as well, that's closer to the Gulf, and where a lot of the rhetoric is that the production to meet the demand from these new LNG terminals is going to come from there due to the location, but they do have higher break-evens and higher costs than in the Northeast.
Coal. What's going on with coal, and what do you expect under a Trump administration to happen to the coal industry in this country?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion now about potentially rolling back some rules from the EPA, or just having being easier on pollution from coal. I've seen, I think it was Duke Energy as well, discuss the possibility of keeping some of their coal plants operating for longer. So that is a possibility, and what it could mean for gas and for power sector gas consumption could be pretty interesting, because over the last 10 years, one of the main roles of gas in the power sector has also been replacing, this retiring coal plants, which has been a benefit in the sense that we've seen lower emissions as well. But this could be more difficult if the coal plants stay operating longer. You might not see gas taking over in the same way it had been.
That's interesting. That would remove this very mechanical market function, basically, for gas and coal. Is the coal, is it green coal? Is it nice coal that we can all get behind, or is it still dirty coal that eventually is just going to have to be phased out?
Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion as well about integrating carbon capture for coal, try to make it cleaner. But yeah, the economics are difficult. And especially in the short term, we probably won't see a lot of that happen. So it could result in emissions even increasing.
Is there the expectation under Trump administration that just the whole move to renewables will slow down, and maybe slow down materially, or is it just too much momentum?
Yeah, no, definitely parts, for example, of the Inflation Reduction Act are repealed, or there's changes in that sense. We could see slower deployment of renewables. My colleagues in BNEF, in our clean energy teams, look in a lot of detail into this. But yeah, this could lead to an interesting dynamic where you have less coal retirements, but maybe you have a slower deployment of renewables, where gas maybe doesn't grow because there's less coal, but takes over some of this generation that would be needed, that would otherwise come from renewables. So I think there's a very interesting analysis and a conversation to have about how this gap is going to look.
All right, Enrique, thanks a lot. Enrique Gonzalez, Bloomberg BNEF, head of U.S. Gas Research. Thank you so very much. This is Bloomberg Intelligence, the Monday.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Monday. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from our interactive broker studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. It's Monday, which also means it's Cyber Monday, which means I'm breaks and checking my phone. I'm looking for deals. I'm all over the place. I haven't bought anything today, but I did some solid work on Black Friday in terms of finding the right deals and the right prices. I felt really good about myself. The only other person I know who would really understand this, aside from my mother, is Poonam Goyal, Senior U.S. e-commerce and retail analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. You told me, what, 2 years ago about Rakuten and how to save deals? Oh, man, am I all over that site right now. They had 20% cash back for a lot of those stores. Anyway, what kind of numbers are you expecting for like a Thursday through Monday of sales right now?
So for the total season, online sales are expected to grow double digits, which we saw on Black Friday, and we expect the same for the weekend. I think in-store sales are going to be up slightly at best, and we saw that on Black Friday. Clearly, today's the day to shop online, so people are shopping online, and double-digit gains are in sight, as expected.
Wow. Is there anything in particular, categories? Is it, I hear electronics most years. Is that the same thing this year?
It's still electronics, toys, games, apparel, kitchen stuff. You know, that's what people are looking for the holidays, and that's what they're stocking up on.
Do you feel that the consumer is going to spend more this year than last year, or is it like, or are the ticket items going to be a little lower at the end of the day?
I think the consumer is going to spend more this year because they're going to buy more things. In terms of the pricing that they're going to pay per item, the discounts honestly are relatively very similar to last year. You know, you'll find places where they're maybe a little steeper or they're a little less steeper, but on average, I would say we're kind of in the same ballpark as last year. So they are buying more because they're looking for deals. They want to shop on deals, and this is the best time to find deals.
So I guess the question, how about luxury here? I'm asking for a friend here that's not here today. How's the luxury space looking these days?
The luxury space is looking good, actually. When we were at the malls on Friday, we noticed a bifurcation in trends where the A-center malls, like the Short Hills Plaza, Garden State Plaza, they were packed. But when you went to some of the B-center malls, traffic was actually light in the earlier part of the day. It picked up and then it decelerated, but it wasn't as busy as the A-centers. So I do think that, you know, affluence is driving spend, and then value is driving spend. It goes back to the same thing that we always talk about. The middle is where you're in trouble, right? If you're sitting at the high end or if you're sitting at the low end, you're still shopping in your own ways and at your own paces.
What stores do you think have it right now in their e-commerce strategy and their actual store strategy?
Yeah, so I think, you know, when it comes to e-commerce, Amazon still clearly stands out. While there is building competition from Walmart, Temu, and Shein, they still drive a lion's share of the online sales because they are the biggest, and anyone with Prime just goes to Amazon like it's their search engine. Outside of that, Walmart is likely a clear winner of the season because they did have deals and they were busy throughout the day. A lot of teen retailers, interestingly, were very crowded. So the Gen Zs are shopping, and those retailers had the right stuff to attract them to their stores and online.
See, you're buying stuff. I'm buying experiences. I'm just scrolling through my email and I see the confirmation for my 2 Eagles tickets I bought in Vegas for April.
Yeah, but like, did you get it on sale? Because those have deals too.
No, I'm just looking at it right now. I don't think I did. So, where are we, Poonam, on you know the differences between Alex and me? I'm still in the experiences mode. She's buying stuff.
I think people are moving more towards stuff now because if you think about like post-pandemic, experiences still matter. It's not that they don't matter, but the amount of traveling that people did right out of the pandemic and even into the 2 or 3 years was quite significant. And those are very big ticket items. So as they pull back a little on that, or normalize, I should say, they have more room to buy things. Now, are they trading down? Are they seeking value? Absolutely. What happens next year with the tariffs? Who knows? Because prices could go up and consumers will be forced to trade down or pull back, but they're still seeking deals at any level. It doesn't matter.
How are the inventories shaping up, AKA, which then tells me what the sales are going to look like?
So the inventories have been really great, and I think that's part of the reasons why the discounts have been able to stay comparable to last year. Heading into the season, retailers were very lean with their inventories, and we saw that. So as long as things don't materially slow from here, I think they should end the season in pretty good condition.
And by good, that means not as much discounting for me, just to be clear.
Not,
okay. Darn it.
Well, not as much like 90% off. You know, the days when we saw like 80% off, 90% off. I don't know if we're there right now.
Those were good days.
Yes, those were
90% off
Not
days.
for the retailers.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. Fair enough.
Not for the retailers, because that hits the margin. Poonam Goyal, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Poonam Goyal, Senior U.S. E-commerce and Retail Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. She's based down there in Princeton. So, you know, I think we'll see how these retail sales come out. But, I mean, the consumer's been pretty strong. It seems like I know there's that K-shaped economy out there. But when you just look at the macro numbers that we tend to get, whether it's employment data, wage data, CPI data, and so on and so forth, but that Torsten Slok note, Torsten Slok of Apollo, kind of just showing that, you know, you look at the absolute level of prices, 20, 30, 40, 50% above what they were in January of 2020 for a lot of stuff that we consume.
Yeah, but I'm not really listening to you, Paul, because I have a nice sale going on right now as I scroll through my emails. So, you know, we have our priorities, and that's important. Sure. K-shaped recovery. Yeah, I got it.
Exactly.
Something happened with manufacturing today. All right, that wraps it up for Bloomberg Intelligence. Paul Sweeney and myself, happy Monday. Let's take a look in quickly on the markets. You're looking at an S&P up still by 0.2%. The NASDAQ outperforming, up by over 1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down slightly by about 0.3%. In the bond market, a little bit of selling, yields a touch higher, particularly on the front end. 2-year yield up 4 basis points. Coming up, Balance of Power with Joe Matthew up next after this global news update.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kathan. Just hours after President Biden pardoned his son Hunter, who was facing possible prison time in 2 cases, we've heard from White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
The process was infected politically, and that's what the president says. And remember, there was a deal on the table that the Department of Justice agreed on, and it fell apart. And his political opponents praised that deal falling apart.
CBS's Katrina Kaufman on what she's been told by someone close to President-elect Trump.
They weren't surprised by this news, but, you know, they thought that Biden said no one was above the law. Apparently that doesn't apply to his own son. He really thinks that Biden is opening up his son to being brought in before congressional Republicans and questioned without the protection of the Fifth Amendment to any federal crimes.
The TSA says it screened a record 3.1 million people at airport checkpoints yesterday as people headed home after Thanksgiving. CBS's Chris Van Cleve.
Today could be the second busiest at airports of the entire travel rush. The TSA expects to screen nearly 2.9 million people. American Airlines tells us it will be its second busiest day. They'll fly nearly 750,000 people.
More snow is falling in parts of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. Nearly 4 feet of lake effect snow is already on the ground in some places. The governor of Texas is threatening to pull funding to a hospital in the state after a doctor's video went viral.
Houston cardiologist Dr. Tony Pastor took to social media with a message about Texas Governor Greg Abbott's executive order requiring hospitals to ask patients their citizenship status.
You do not have to answer this question. Wouldn't it be amazing if everyone doesn't answer it?
Abbott responded with the message, hey, Texas Children's Hospital and Baylor College of Medicine, this doctor is putting your Medicaid and Medicare funding at risk. Pastor doesn't believe Abbott's trying to recoup medical costs.
I worry that this is information that people are going to use to deport people.
Chris Fox for CBS News, Austin.
Michigan's Supreme Court has cleared the way for a Grand Rapids police officer to face a murder trial in the shooting death of a black man, Patrick Lyoya, in 2022. Correspondent Nancy Chen tells us retailers are poised for a Cyber Monday that could smash online spending records.
Today, the biggest online spending and shopping day ever. That's what they're expecting. Online spending in general expected to peak between the hours of 8 and 10 o'clock tonight, with $15.7 million spent every minute. The biggest discounts will be on electronics and apparel, with the average discount in general about 30%.
The Dow is down 100 points. This is CBS News.
people love.
We're seeing more of a Trump cabinet nominee than we may have wanted.
You can't take a shower. I'm doing a video.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appears nude in the shower behind his wife, Cheryl Hines, as she promotes her beauty product line on Instagram. Her head and upper body cover his unmentionables as she giggles and goes on with her message.
Okay, this is, honey.
It comes on the heels of a highly publicized sexting controversy involving RFK Jr., who's been tapped by President-elect Trump to head up the Health and Human Services Department. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
The publisher of the Oxford English Dictionary has picked brain rot as word of the year, defining it as the apparent deterioration of a person's mental or intellectual state due to the overconsumption of online content considered to be trivial or unchallenging. I'm Steve Kathan, CBS News.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
I beg your pardon. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as President Biden turns on his pledge to not pardon his son Hunter, going even further to issue a full and unconditional pardon following a family Thanksgiving on Nantucket last weekend. It's the talk of Washington, even as Donald Trump keeps tongues wagging with his latest pick now for FBI director, and as lawmakers today return for the lame duck. We're going to have the latest this hour from Bloomberg Politics editor Laura Davison and from our signature panel. Fresh from the weekend, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, and later, rebel fighters in Syria take over much of Aleppo. We're going to talk about this important challenge to Bashar al-Assad with Brett Bruin from the Global Situation Room. And it's all after a look at Wall Street. We start there with the baseline, as always. And Amy Morris and the markets. Amy, how's it look?
All right, thank you, Joe. Bonds actually are getting hit now. Stocks seeing some mild gains. Traders are bracing for more economic data. We check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.25%. NASDAQ is up more than 1%. The Dow, though, is down more than 0.25%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.17%, and the 2-year yield is at 4.18%. The euro also is weakening after political turmoil in France. The far-right party of Marine Le Pen is backing a motion that would topple the French government. They're looking to dissolve the current government. That has the euro trading at 1.048 against the dollar. And Intel shares are 4.7% higher. Intel says CEO Pat Gelsinger was forced to retire. He's now left the board effective yesterday. Supermicro Computer shares 27% higher after an external review by a special committee of its board and external counsel found no evidence of wrongdoing. The committee says it will appoint a new top financial leadership. Rather, the company says that. And investors in Stellantis are reeling after the surprise departure of CEO Carlos Tavares. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook reports the writing may have been on the wall after the Jeep maker's profit warning back in September.
Days after that profit warning, he got rid of the CFO, he got rid of the COO, he replaced the brand heads for Maserati and Alfa Romeo. All of this, though, potentially not enough.
Bloomberg's Oliver Crook in Berlin. Shares of Stellantis now more than 6% lower. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
Okay, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power, the Cyber Monday edition. Do we still need to call it Cyber Monday? I won't get into this, but digression after spending most of my Black Friday shopping online. 18 days until the government runs out of money, but that is not where we start our conversation today with lawmakers streaming back into town. Yeah, this is it. The lame duck. No stopping us now between here and the 20th of December with the new Congress standing by, be sworn in about a month from now. And of course, all the talk about the transition. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving and a great long weekend. I hope it was a long weekend. If not, welcome back to the grind. It's Monday. I missed you, and it's good to have you here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. Search Bloomberg Business News Live, because we've got a lot to catch up on. With 4 days of news to unpack, news to digest along with your stuffing, you thought we'd be talking about Kash Patel all day, right? I did.
till last night when the pardon dropped. This, of course, is our top story. Joe Biden, following a Thanksgiving on Nantucket Island with the family, deciding to do what he said he would not do. Let's go back to June, the G7 in Italy, and President Biden.
I'm extremely proud of my son, Hunter. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know. And I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Fast forward to the 1st of December. Joe Biden, quote, "For those offenses against the United States, which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1st, 2014 through December 1, 2024, an executive grant of clemency for his son," which is where we start our conversation with Laura Davison, Bloomberg Politics editor, driving our coverage here on what I see was another working weekend. You just can't escape, can you?
It's usually, though, Trump that's making news in the evening. So it was a fun surprise to have Biden making news.
Just imagine Joe Biden thinking of this in Nantucket as he considered his options. What brought him to this extent? And it might not be a single event. I just wondered if Kash Patel, having that name out there, having the conversation that he was hearing in the media, brought him to this point.
You know, and it's not Matt Gaetz, but it is Pam Bondi. So looking at the cast of characters who Trump has slated to run the top law enforcement agencies, that certainly has weighed a role. But also remember that the clip you just played of Biden saying, "No, I'm not going to pardon my son," that's June 13th. June 13th, Biden is still running for president. You know, Biden now in early December is no longer running for president. The political stakes are not there. The election is over. And just the calculus and the risk are a lot less to him. You know, now he says he's looking more at sort of what do I want to do in my last 3 or 4 weeks in the White House versus, you know, sort of what does this mean for my legacy? What does this mean big picture for my political future?
Hunter Biden was to be sentenced later this month on the conviction on the gun felony charges and then, of course, the federal tax crimes he pleaded guilty to in September. Was there a concern that there would be more charges would materialize, because this didn't only pardon him from these crimes?
The pardon, the language of that pardon certainly indicates that that they were at least worried that this would be, you know, that either there were other crimes that may be out there, or that, you know, there would be sort of an impetus among these Trump officials to go and try to see what else might exist out there. So this is a really, really broad pardon. You know, this is not something since Richard Nixon that we've kind of seen this kind of language. Usually it's, you know, clemency for a specific act, a specific crime, much more narrowly targeted.
Full and unconditional, as we read. We've seen some Democrats wavering on this. The governor of Colorado, Representative Greg Stanton, the first to come out in the House, Democrat from Arizona, saying Hunter committed felonies and was convicted by a jury of his peers. But who cares if you're not running for re-election? Is that the way we're looking at this?
Yes, and I think now a lot of people, particularly in areas where their you know, sort of political calculus, you know, wants them to separate a little bit from Biden. This is something that they can, you know, say, hey, look, you know, I don't agree with the president on this, and then, you know, say, hey, but look, you know, look at this infrastructure money, look at this CHIPS money, something else that they gives them a little bit of. It's a politically convenient thing to criticize if you need to distance yourself from Biden.
So they go to Nantucket every year, right? That's what the Biden family does for Thanksgiving. What do we think went on at the Thanksgiving table? Is that when this was decided?
Yeah, and this was a very quiet weekend in terms of public appearances. You know, the president was very much, you know, behind closed doors with family, and, you know, I think the gravity of just both, you know, Hunter's, you know, the date for him to be sentenced was just, you know, a couple weeks away. Plus, you know, Biden also knows that he's not going to be in the White House, you know, in another 6 weeks or so. So this is all kind of culminating and weighing in. And I think that as they kind of sat down and talked about this, it said, you know, look, we may have said this, but you know, what's in the best interest of our family? He's not thinking about that versus the party or the country.
By the way, we are waiting to see President Biden in Africa, stepping off Air Force One shortly in Angola. This is the last big trip of the term. He is making good on a promise to visit Africa before he leaves the White House. After this trip, he comes back. It's a couple Christmas parties. I mean, what's the rest of Joe Biden's presidency look like?
You know, there's a couple things that that his administration is trying to do to shore up before Trump takes over. You know, one is, you know, Ukraine, getting as much money out the door as they can to Ukraine. Also looking at some of these legacy, you know, kind of legacy pieces. You know, the CHIPS Act, infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. What sort of, you know, money can they get in place that, because, you know, there's a lot of these things that Trump would like to rescind or make more difficult going forward. forward. So that's sort of the focus, but it's not going to be a big splashy exit. It's going to be the sort of the perfunctory parties trying to sew up what they can at the administrative level.
Oh, he will be at the inaugural. Those will be some interesting optics, right?
Yes, I mean we'll get some more interesting photos like we did a couple weeks ago when Trump came to the White House, and the handoff that Biden didn't get 4 years ago, when he knocked on the White House door.
Yeah. As we spend time with Laura Davison on this Monday after the long weekend, I'm just curious to hear where your head is on transitions. As I mentioned earlier, I thought Kash Patel would be the lead story. In any other world, it would be. Is he actually going to be the next FBI director based on what you're hearing from Republican senators?
It's not yet clear. There are some senators who have come out and expressed a little bit of concern. He is a more divisive figure. Also there seemed to be sort of a group of four that's forming. Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are going to be sort of the ones who are sort of in limbo here, that it's not clear consensus that they will make it through. I would think it highly unlikely that all four of those would fail. Maybe one, maybe two. We'll have to see after these meetings are taking place this week. These folks are up on the Hill meeting with senators, and we might get some inclination going forward on who has a little bit more support versus less. Obviously, lots of bad news over the weekend for Pete Hegseth. This email coming out from his mother, very critical of his behavior towards women and his family life. So there's a lot of stuff that's circulating right now that the senators, who have been away for several weeks, are now just coming back to Washington and digesting.
I don't even know where to start with this. Penelope Hegseth sent an email to her son in 2018, said on Friday she regretted the email, essentially calling him a womanizer and telling him to change his ways after this whistleblower report we learn about, CVA whistleblower that came out of quite a dive here in the New Yorker. He got drunk to the point of needing to be carried out of multiple work events, sexually pursued the organization's female staffers despite being married. This is more of the same that we keep hearing about this individual. Should we expect that he will stand for a confirmation hearing?
It's so far it seems likely. Trump's team has not wavered on him. You may note that Trump has similar allegations, against him when it comes to treatment of women. So this isn't not necessarily seen as a negative in Trump world. There's people on the Hill like Joni Ernst, senator from Iowa, who herself is a survivor of sexual assault. She's also has close ties to the military, being a veteran herself, her daughter as well. So this is going to create some really interesting and perhaps uncomfortable optics in the hearing room.
Yeah. Just take a look at RFK Jr. as well. As you mentioned, we've got New York Times today talking about his drug addiction, compulsive sexual behavior, deep dives into conspiracy theories. Wall Street Journal talking about a sexual assault accusation in the 1990s. NBC talking about describing the CDC's vaccine division as fascist. These are going to be wild confirmation hearings, assuming they happen.
Yeah, and it's normally when these picks go in, they sort of moderate. They tell the senators a little bit what they want to hear. Trump is also going to be watching these hearings very closely, so it'll be interesting kind of how these candidates sort of, do they kind of, go with sort of the most, made for TV sort of lines, or are they, sort of moderating their positions a little bit to try to eke through these nominations?
Boy, I'll tell you what, the lame duck is going to be fascinating, but then we just start with a whole new Congress and a whole bunch of new questions come January. Laura Davison helping to steer our coverage here from Washington. Laura, thank you so much. Someday you'll get a weekend, I suspect. Maybe not as Bloomberg's politics editor, not in this world. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Great to have you back with us here on the fastest show in politics. We'll turn our attention to the other major story cooking over the weekend, and that is the rebellion underway in Syria, what it will mean for the Bashar al-Assad regime and for Vladimir Putin. We'll have that coming up next on Bloomberg.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Stocks are heading into the final trading month of the year in some record territory now. We do check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 up 0.25%. NASDAQ up more than 1%. The Dow is down 0.3%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.18% and the 2-year yield at 4.19%. Supermicro computer shares are 32% higher after it said an external review of its business by a special committee of its board and external counsel found no evidence of wrongdoing and that the company will appoint a new top financial leadership. Cyber weekend e-commerce sales grew 9% in the U.S. this year. That's up from 6% in 2023. Salesforce data show the average discount was about 28%, which is actually down from 2% last year. Salesforce says the discounts this year haven't really quite met expectations. And the euro is down 0.8% after the far-right party of Marine Le Pen backed a motion to topple the French government. The party is looking to dissolve the government. That has the euro trading at 1.049 against the dollar. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
Amy, thank you so much watching Wall Street for us here as we cover politics live from Washington on the fastest show in politics, Balance of Power. Great to see you, and I hope you had a great holiday. Welcome back to reality. As you were eating leftovers over the weekend, a group of rebel fighters in Syria were advancing to the south after capturing Aleppo over the holiday weekend. That's the largest city in Syria that you may not have heard mentioned in some time, although we have had our eyes on Syria with continued strikes from Israelis and even American forces in some cases, keeping tabs on a rebellion that has now caught fire once again. This assault is being led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an Islamist rebel group based in northwestern Syria. And this is a big deal not only for the balance of power in the Middle East, it's a big deal for Russia. It's a big deal for Iran, knowing, of course, that Moscow and Tehran have spent a lot of time and money propping up the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And they have a couple of things going when you consider the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza. That's why we wanted to focus on this Monday as the Trump transition picks get all the attention along with the Biden pardon. This is critically important. And we're joined now by an expert. He's just back from a trip to Europe where he spent time with political and business leaders, and he's all ours, at least for now. Brett Bruen, President and CEO of the Global Situation Room. Brett, it's great to have you back. Of course, as a veteran diplomat, I know your eyes are on Syria, and this is an area of the world that you've dealt with in the past. How is this happening so quickly, and what does it mean for Bashar al-Assad?
Well, the short answer, Joe, is there's an imbalance of power. And I think what has transpired in Lebanon, as well as regionally with Iran, and listeners will know that Bashar al-Assad gets most, if not all, of his support from Tehran. And the hits that they have taken through their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, are starting to hurt. And there are, I think, a number of actors, HTS, as you mentioned before, one of them that smell blood in the water and feel like this is a moment to strike. And clearly, they struck with great effectiveness.
Are they right? So far, it seems they are.
They are. And I think the key question that is looming over Damascus at the moment is whether or not Assad's forces will be able to regroup. Now, they do have an air advantage. It isn't, however, the air advantage they enjoyed earlier, about 10 years ago, when first there was an uprising across the Syrian landscape. Now there are drones. There are other unmanned air capabilities that the rebel forces can use. There's obviously also just a very different power dynamic in the region. And on top of this, Russia plays a big part in supporting Assad. They've got their own hardware problems in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are upping their efforts as Trump looks to take power here in Washington again. So this isn't a good situation for Assad. I would give his odds, better than 50-50 at this point. But it's still, quite frankly, a bit of an unknown.
Let's talk a bit about Russia and Iran then, because it's pretty easy to connect the dots here, as you are doing. When it comes to Iran, the potential here for the dismantling of its proxy network that we've talked about so much with regard to Israel is great. What will we see happen to Tehran if Bashar al-Assad falls?
Well, and what's interesting here, yes, if Assad falls, who steps into this void? HTS formerly was the extension of al-Qaeda in Syria. They have moderated their position over the years. They've tried, one, just to appeal to a Syrian population that doesn't necessarily take well to some of those extremist ideologies. But on the other hand, I think what you're seeing is a shifting in some of these groups. It isn't something that is static. There's obviously different rebel groups, and they join forces, and sometimes they're fighting against one another. Other times, as now, they're fighting together. You know, what we don't want to see, Joe, is a Libya scenario where we end up seeing the fall of a leader like Gaddafi, and into the void come a whole lot of warring factions. And so what's really important here is that the international community start to step up now and preserve some, coalition, preserve some semblance of stability, and hopefully get a plan in place for how we're going to handle this thing potentially post-Assad.
Wow. Give us the view from Moscow, then. Of course, Vladimir Putin is stretched thin in Ukraine. Does he have any influence left here?
Well, he has some, and you saw Russian air assets deployed in defense of Syrian troops, and yet at the same time, he hasn't got a lot, Joe. He will have a small presence in Syria. He doesn't have a lot more to give. So when Assad's, nervously picking up the phone and calling Moscow, the other end's going to say, well, good luck, but we don't have much more to send you.
As Bloomberg is reporting here, as Aleppo fell to rebels over the weekend, the Syrian president flew to Moscow. What does that tell us?
Well, we have long known that Assad was essentially an asset of Moscow, an extension of Iran. And so he is going, to make that personal plea and to try and to push to get whatever he can to defend against these rebel troops. But again, there isn't much, especially as Russia is worried about what the next month and a half has in store for Ukraine. Zelensky is going to push to get the best possible negotiating position he can, with Trump coming in and talking about this big deal that he has in the works.
What does this all mean for the Biden administration, Brett Bruin? Joe Biden, of course, abroad right now. He just touched down in Angola a short time ago, but actually had the wherewithal to announce a ceasefire with Hezbollah last week, is reportedly working on one in Gaza. Does this White House have any influence about outcomes in Syria, or is this about the Trump administration?
Well, look, Biden's influence is certainly waning, and they're trying to make a good effort to secure something with Hamas before the clock ticks midnight on January 20th. But at the same time, I think, quite frankly, a lot of these leaders know that Biden is old news, that he is no longer able to yield and wield the kind of power. And so you're going to see the Netanyahus, you're going to see even the Putins trying to hold on for Trump to come in and hopefully to get a better deal.
We're having this conversation, Brett. We haven't mentioned the name Tulsi Gabbard yet, and I'm not sure that we should. But she's facing a confirmation hearing to be the nation's top spy, essentially, knowing of her dalliances with Bashar al-Assad, her opinion of the veracity of his regime, essentially her support, if I can call it that, for him. How does this color the way senators will look at this matter when it comes time for confirmation?
Well, this is unfortunate timing if you're Tulsi Gabbard, because it is going to bring to the fore both what Assad did in the past, dropping chemical weapons on civilians in Syria, but it also, quite frankly, is likely to bring more atrocities. And Gabbard is going to have a tough time explaining why, in the midst, the height, in fact, Joe, of some of those atrocities, she went without any clear diplomatic mission other than to provide legitimacy, other than to provide a propaganda point for Assad to use. So is this the kind of person that you want making those major decisions about U.S. intelligence and how to deploy our intelligence assets. I think a lot of senators will have those questions.
You better believe it. This is someone who has said that Assad is not the enemy of the United States. They're going to have images, video of her with him that is shown in these confirmation hearings, no?
Well, and it raises the question, in terms of vetting, you normally, in a normal transition, would want to have checked these sort of things. Did that happen? Maybe. But quite frankly, it's just a bad split screen for Trump. He's going to have to justify why this person who's had some pretty unsavory dalliances with both Bashar al-Assad as well as even with Moscow and Moscow's propaganda, this is the person that's going to keep us safe. And Joe, at the end of the day, that's what the job's about. And I think, with some of these national security positions, it's really, really important. Fine. You want to offer up some party favors to the donors or others who supported you, political allies like Gabbard, but do you really want to put them in that sensitive position that keeps us all safe?
Mm-hmm. Brett, while you're with us here, we're looking at Joe Biden step off Air Force One in Angola. He did promise to visit Africa before he left the White House. He's making good on that promise with just weeks to go here. Does this administration play a role internationally from here on out between now and January 20th? Does he, in fact, have any influence as we wait for Donald Trump globally?
Well, it's interesting. He's going to Angola in part to celebrate U.S. investment in the country, in the infrastructure, and as a play against Beijing to try and reassert American relevance, quite frankly, on the continent. I served half my diplomatic career in Africa, and we are losing the game when it comes to influence, not just against China, but even, going back to Russia. Russian Wagner forces have been deployed across the Sahel in West Africa with great effect, forcing out peacekeepers, forcing out even some of our diplomatic missions. So Biden is showing up in an African continent that is radically different than when he took office. And Joe, I think, unfortunately, it illustrates how ineffective a lot of his diplomatic initiatives have been. Even as well-intentioned as they are, you can't look at Africa today and say they are a stronger ally of the U.S. than they were 4 years ago.
Well, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about, Brett, for the remainder of this administration, the confirmation process, and whatever the next Trump administration brings here internationally. So thank you for the insights today. And let's stay close on all these issues. Brett Bruen is President and CEO of the Global Situation Room, a veteran of foreign policy and diplomacy here in Washington, D.C., and a perfect voice for us today as we keep our eyes on what is happening in Syria. Remember, we had this conversation. This one is not over yet. These rebel fighters continue their way southward, and we're still waiting, of course, for resolution in Gaza. All of that ahead as we turn our attention to our signature panel. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us on the Biden pardon and on the transition. Cash FBI. We'll have more on that next on the fastest show in politics.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Political turmoil in France has the euro still moving lower. Marine Le Pen's far-right party backing a no-confidence vote against the government. The party looking to dissolve the current government in France. The euro now trading at 104.9 against the dollar. We do check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 up 0.25%. NASDAQ down more than 1%, and the Dow is up down 0.3%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.18% and the 2-year yield at 4.19%. Manufacturing activity in the U.S. shrank in November by less than forecast as a gauge of new orders moved into expansion territory for the first time in 8 months. The Institute for Supply Management's factory gauge rose 1.9 points to 48.4. Timothy Fiore is chair of ISM's Manufacturing Business Survey Committee and says new orders finally broke 50, and manufacturing inventory rose 5.5 points.
I think the other point here is our employment, although we're still destaffing, we're not destaffing as strongly. We came in at 48.1. So the three of those together got us close to 49.
ISM's Timothy Fiore says it was overall a good report for November. Bank of America is seeing optimism and pent-up demand among U.S. middle market companies looking to expand their businesses despite lingering uncertainties. Wendy Stewart is Bank of America's president of Global Commercial Banking.
Clients, I think, have been a bit surprised that the economic environment has been more stable than they were expecting. That combined with interest rates coming down and that demand is creating opportunity.
Bank of America's Wendy Stewart on Bloomberg TV. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. We now go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
Thanks, Amy Morris. Watching Wall Street here on the fastest show in politics. We, of course, watching politics every day here in Washington, D.C. with a new wrinkle, it seems, every hour. What a weekend this was. I'd look down at the phone. I'd check the terminal. Oh, this is going to be our lead story on Monday, clearly. And then next time I check, there'd be another. Culminating last evening with the pardon, full and unconditional, announced by Joe Biden. If you're asking where is Hunter, he is now pardoned. The language is really something. As the president says, he decided to issue this executive grant of clemency, quote, for those offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period of January 2014 to December 1, 2024. The scope of this pardon is what's getting the attention just as much as Joe Biden turning on his word to never do this. He has repeatedly said so. We played you a quick snippet of him saying so just back in June in Italy. Margaret Love, who served from 1990 to 97 as U.S. pardon attorney, that is a real job at the Justice Department, talking to Politico today, she says, I've never seen language like this in a pardon document that purports to pardon offenses that have not apparently even been charged, with the exception of the Nixon pardon. You go back to read this again. For those offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during this period of time. Presumably, the Biden family was thinking that there may be more than we already knew about, more charges coming from an emboldened Republican Party here in Washington. Agencies tasked with retribution. Look at the Kash Patel announcement. Look at what Jim Comer had to say, for that matter. Joe Biden goes on to write, there has been an effort to break Hunter, who has been 5.5 years sober. This clearly was personal. It is his son we're talking about here, and it came off of the long Thanksgiving Day weekend in which the Biden family gathered in Nantucket, as they do each year. Can only imagine what our panel thinks about this. They're back together after the holiday. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, Senior Democracy Fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, Bloomberg Politics contributor and Republican strategist. It's great to see you both, and I hope you both had a great holiday weekend. Jeannie, are you disappointed? This was, of course, a big part of what Joe Biden ran on. It was character and his mission, his statement that no one was above the law. Now means what after this?
Yeah, you know, it is, I think, a sad commentary on where we are. First of all, as parents, we all understand the pain he has been in, the fact he's lost 2 children already. And of course, that has been weighing heavily on him, his son facing prison. That said, it is what you mentioned. It is the scope of this thing, 10 years for crimes not even charged. It is also the rationale, because he has become Donald Trump all of a sudden. Here is a man who ran during Watergate, who served as the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who consistently told us that all of those charges of lawfare against the judiciary were unfounded, that these were not politicized branches of government. And yet he turns around and doesn't just say, I'm pardoning Hunter because he's my son and I love him and all the things he's gone through. It's because he was unfairly prosecuted by this Justice Department. And that, to me, is the most troubling reflection, because for many people in the public, they will look and say, Donald Trump was right. We can't trust anybody. And when the rule of law is attacked like that, that is a problem for all of us. So to me, it is a sad moment for that reason.
You know, it's possible, Rick, to be disappointed in this move, but also empathetic as a father. How do you look at this as a Republican, knowing that Joe Biden repeatedly said this would never happen?
Yeah, look, I think this is a huge error on his part. Obviously, as a father, I would say my heart goes out to him and all the trouble that he's had in his relationship with Hunter Biden. But the reality is, and it's exactly what Jeannie said, when you defend the Justice Department as being resistant to political manipulation, and then you claim political manipulation on behalf of your son, it just is the wrong approach. And the reality, too, is, you know, I think he's handled the entire legal situation with Donald Trump improperly. I mean, I go back to what Mitt Romney said 6 months ago. You know, in order to put all this aside and have the country heal and move forward, Joe Biden should have, you know, pardoned Donald Trump when he had a chance. And the reality is, if he had, nobody would even raise an eyebrow at this point, because it would have been a fair use of the pardon authority by the president that looks like it's non-political. And in this case, it looks strikingly political. So look, when you sit and say over and over and over again, no man is above the law, and then your son is in a position of getting a get-out-of-jail-free card, it just doesn't make sense to any ordinary American, I would imagine.
Well, it's not too late for that, Jeannie. I mean, we're going to get more pardons, right? This tends to go right down to the wire in some of the final acts that any president will take. Remembering, by the way, I did look back to get the number here. Donald Trump pardoned 74 people and addressed the sentences of 70 others here. It was 143 altogether, but 74 were actual pardons, not commutations. With that said, Jeannie, should that be the next pardon from Joe Biden?
You know, I think it will be. In the modern era, we have seen this from presidents. You know, we all remember how Bill Clinton, you know, pardoning many people, but including Mark Rich, he got a lot of you know, sort of criticism, and it stained his legacy on that one. Similarly, as you mentioned, Donald Trump. So I think we will see more. But to me, none of that is going to erase this as it pertains to Joe Biden's legacy. And again, I am empathetic to the fact that it is his son. I'm empathetic to what Hunter Biden has gone through. The reality is, he not only said point blank he would not do it, he also explained doing it last night by saying this was a miscarriage of justice. The same language Donald Trump is using to justify what I expect we're going to all see, you know, after January 2025, when he takes office, the pardoning of the January 6th. You know, all of those, however many of those have now, those people have now been sentenced. And so we see here an undermining of our institutions, particularly our judicial institution. It is, I think abominable when it comes from Donald Trump, and it is unforgivable when it comes from Joe Biden. He should have said, I'm pardoning my son because he's my son, not because the Judiciary Department or the Department of Justice has done something untoward. And that to me is incredibly distressing.
Jeannie, I'm glad you mentioned January 6th. Donald Trump did respond to this. A Truth Social post, Rick, quote, does the pardon given by Joe to Hunter include the J6 hostages, as he writes, who have now been imprisoned for years, question mark? Is that the first thing Donald Trump does when it comes to pardons in the White House in a second term?
I don't know if it's the first thing, Joe, that Donald Trump does, and he tends to go quiet on this issue of pardoning the J6ers from time to time. Yeah. So who knows what's on his mind? But look, I mean, it's okay for a president to pardon people. I mean, President Trump pardoned his, son-in-law's father, who he's now just appointed as an ambassador. So, these things happen, and I think it's the context with which they happen. And Jeannie's right. If he said, he's my son, and I love my son, and I'm going to use this power, that I have while I have it to clear his record. I think that would have gone over a lot easier. But the idea that somehow the Justice Department was unfair to his son, but fair to Donald Trump, I mean, come on, you can't have it both ways. And I think that's the criticism and the cynicism that, people are seeing the actions behind. The president should always have the right to make pardons as he sees fit. It can be for lots of different reasons, but there ought to be an effort to try and not denigrate the Justice Department in the process of doing that. We're used to too many people kicking our institutions to the curb, and this is one last time he had a chance to do it the right way and didn't.
It's pretty incredible. Jeannie, you wonder to what extent the choice of Kash Patel following the selection, realizing it didn't work out, of Matt Gaetz, FBI, Justice Department in these two cases, brought the Bidens to this point. What changed? Was it Donald Trump's messaging based on the picks he was making that brought them to this point, or did they have a tip that some prosecutor somewhere was going to bring more charges? What happened last week at the Thanksgiving retreat in Nantucket?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. He said publicly he was not going to do this numerous times. He sent Karine Jean-Pierre out there to reiterate that number of times. And then something changed, or he wasn't being upfront with us. Today, Karine Jean-Pierre, as you know, Joe, came out, and when she was asked if he would have pardoned Hunter if Harris had won, she seemed to suggest he may not have, and then backtracked on that. So I don't know if we know what has happened, but I do know what he said in this statement that is so distressing, which is that this was a miscarriage of justice. And, the reality is that this pardon power that Alexander Hamilton gave the president is the one unchecked power that they have constitutionally, the only one. So, they can use it as they want. But gosh, you want them to use it responsibly. And again, that's why I reiterate, if he had done this and said it's out of love of my son, and followed it with other pardons of people who are also the children of fathers and mothers, it may, have made a difference. But to say it's because it was a miscarriage of justice. And I am very curious, does he now pardon his brother? He knows that the Republicans are going to be looking into Hunter, or were. Does his brother follow? So this, I think, is going to be something Joe Biden and his family and his legacy are going to be weighed down by. And I think it's most unfortunate the way the statement itself was put out there.
Man, remember when Roger Clinton was a big deal? Rick, I mentioned Kash Patel. In our remaining moment here, he has said, quote, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections, unquote. We know he had a focus on the Hunter Biden case. Did this pick have something to do with this late announcement on a Sunday?
Yeah, it could have. I mean, it's so impossible to predict what happens over a Thanksgiving dinner. You know, you have a little red wine, you eat too much of that poultry, you know, crazy things start to happen. And look at what happened on this Thanksgiving. So sure, there could be a added fear that Kash Patel would try to use the Justice Department to wreak vengeance on the Biden family. And that brings up the issue that Jeannie just mentioned about trying to cover your family members with pardons on your way out. I mean, if we're at a point now where our president and their families have to be covered by pardons on exit because they're afraid of what happened to, in this case, Donald Trump when he wound up losing office, then we've missed the whole point.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
When I was younger, I used to be in bands. I'd play drums in bands and toured America with them, did a lot of session drumming, recorded albums. So yeah, it was good fun doing the drumming. The reason I stopped it, well, I still play, but not as serious as I did when I was younger, but drumming doesn't pay the bills. I was never good enough to be able to pay the bills with it, but it was good fun. I started RJF, and the reason I started it was I saw a gap in the market for particular early stage and startup businesses. With the experience that I've got of running businesses, of being a finance director at the very biggest companies in the world to being finance director of small startups, we were looking at providing more than just basic accountancy services. So yes, we'll do all that. We'll do all the basic, all the statutory side of things that you need to do. But there's so much more value that we can add, and I wanted to have my experience to help these startups, because a lot of them don't really know where to go. You can go to your high street accountants and they can do a good job compliance-wise, but you would question whether they've actually been in the fire line of a business. Have you been in a business where you're thinking, how do I pay wages next week? Or business is really successful, what do we do with it next? Or how do we grow it? How do we grow into international territories? Or how do we grow our markets? How do we expand? So a lot of the experience I've seen over the years and seen different types of business in different sectors, I thought, well, it's a real value that I can add to these businesses as opposed to just being an FD, because a lot of these businesses can't afford an FD. But if we can take care of their statutory side of things, the compliance side of things, I'm on hand to be able to help and advise businesses with their growth strategy, or if they're in difficulty, help them through these times.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
Dissolve the current government in France that has the euro trading at 104.8 against the dollar. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
Amy Morris, thank you so much, and welcome to the fastest show, Monday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio, as we welcome our global television audience to the conversation. We have a lot to catch up on, unpacking 4 days of news here on what was in fact a very busy Thanksgiving weekend in the world of politics, culminating with the announcement last evening by Joe Biden offering a full and unconditional pardon to his son Hunter. This is something that, of course, came late yesterday and has been driving the news ever since, following word earlier in the weekend that Donald Trump was tapping Kash Patel to be the next director of the FBI, even though we already have a director of the FBI. And potentially connecting some of the dots here might be part of our job today, knowing that retribution and the dismantling of the agency that he has been tapped to run is part of the charge if Kash Patel is in fact confirmed. I want to start, though, with our conversation on this pardon from Joe Biden, who has just touched down in Africa, as a matter of fact, on a 3-day trip. He left the country shortly after issuing this unconditional pardon. Wendy Benjaminson, Bloomberg's Washington senior editor, is with us, helping to drive our political coverage from Washington. Wendy, it's great to have you. The scope and breadth of this pardon is what is making news almost as much as the fact that Joe Biden essentially changed his mind on this, turned on his pledge to never issue a pardon to Hunter Biden. What changed?
You know, we've seen some, it's hard to tell, Joe, but we've seen some reporting that suggests that the family got together over Thanksgiving and talked it out, and the president just decided to throw everything he has said, his tradition of upholding institutions, his tradition since he was a 29-year-old senator of, you know, coloring within the lines, and pardoning his son for a number of felonies related to gun and tax charges. It was really a stunning reversal of everything we've known Joe Biden to stand for. And then literally moments later, an hour later maybe, he leaves for Africa. You can really tell this guy is done with his job.
I guess things are winding down, Wendy, and knowing that there will likely be more pardons to follow, we keep our focus on this one. Hunter Biden was facing 2 separate sentencings this month on the convictions that we've already discussed. Some gun charges here, 3 felony gun charges, as well as the federal tax crimes that he pleaded guilty to. There was a thought, Wendy, that there might be more where these came from, because the pardon covers more than just these.
Well, that is the indication that there might have been more coming. This pardon covers everything he might have done in the decade between 2014 and 2024. And so who knows what those, other charges might have been or might not have been. There might have been nothing and he just wanted to keep it, very tightly wrapped, but it was an unusual pardon even for presidents who pardon a lot of people, including Donald Trump, who has pardoned a number of friends and relatives his first term.
That's true. The Kushners and Steve Bannons of the world, however, don't seem to match up to this because of the full-throated nature of the pardon and the fact that Joe Biden said he would never do it. Some Democrats aren't happy. It's not just Republicans raising eyebrows here, Wendy. The governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, who, by the way, was a surrogate for the Harris campaign, called it, quote, a bad precedent, could be abused by later presidents, and will sadly tarnish his reputation. Unquote. Pretty tough stuff. Greg Stanton, the first Democratic lawmaker from the House of Representatives to speak up, said Hunter committed felonies and was convicted by a jury of his peers. Remembering that Joe Biden ran on the fact that no one was above the law. It was what was supposed to make him different than Donald Trump. What does this tell us now about the way he'll be remembered?
Well, it couldn't have been a bigger gift for Donald Trump if he had wrapped it up and put it under the tree. I mean, it gives Donald Trump every political avenue to say, see, even Joe Biden says his DOJ is weaponized. And look, he's favoring his son. It was a really, a really strong political decision to just sort of drop this grenade and walk out of the presidency, because it's a message to people who have drug addictions and have gone to prison who do not get pardoned by the president. It is a message to tax evaders that they can get away, that they can't get away with it, but the president's son can. And again, just a real gift to Donald Trump. And his team didn't waste a moment last night coming out and saying exactly that.
To take from Wendy Benjaminson, Bloomberg's Washington senior editor. Wendy, it's great to see you and appreciate the insights as we add a voice of experience. I've been looking forward to the conversation with Nick Ackerman, the former federal prosecutor, former assistant special Watergate prosecutor, former assistant U.S. attorney, is with us. Nick Ackerman, great to see you and welcome back. Wendy just described this pardon as a grenade. How would you?
Well, I think you have to really look at what's going on here. To me, it's not so much a grenade. I think what President Biden realized was that Hunter Biden was going to be in the target of Donald Trump's retribution. And if he went through the criminal justice system and continued, was sentenced to prison, which he very well could have been sentenced on the tax case for a period of time, he then would be at the mercy of Donald Trump's Justice Department and Bureau of Prisons. And this would have given Donald Trump the opportunity to do what they did to his former attorney, Michael Cohen, where they put him in solitary confinement, where when he was released to go home because of the COVID epidemic, he was put back into prison again out of spite to keep him from publishing a book. So I think what's really going on here is if Joe Biden had actually won not Joe Biden, but Harris had won the election, I don't think there would be a pardon. But I don't think he really trusts a Justice Department that's headed by Pam Bondi, Donald Trump's two defense lawyers from New York, and Kash Patel, who is going to be the FBI director, to give anybody a fair shake in the system. And for that reason, I think that is why he ultimately decided to pardon his son.
Well, okay, so you're answering one of the questions that I have been asking Nick Ackerman. It's these appointments that made the difference. When the Biden family sat down for Thanksgiving on Nantucket, they had the big family conversation. That's what was different. And then you add Kash Patel over the weekend, and Joe Biden started writing this pardon. Is that how it went in your mind?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, what would you do if it was your son and you knew that the guy who was going to be president next had already threatened retribution against you and your son, the very son that Donald Trump sent Rudy Giuliani halfway across the world to Ukraine to try and dig up dirt on him, and absolutely got nothing, but went to those lengths and has already threatened retribution against the Bidens. What would you do under these circumstances, knowing that the Justice Department was going to be totally manned by political hacks who are answerable to Donald Trump.
I'm going to ask you about some of these appointments because I'm really curious to get your take. Joe Biden wrote, though, and I just want to get your take as a former prosecutor. He wrote in his statement, "No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion that Hunter was singled out only because he is my son. And that is wrong," he said. "In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me." Now, clearly this is personal for Joe Biden, but what does the prosecutor in you say when you read that?
Well, there's a little bit of truth here. First of all, as to the gun violation, no one is ever prosecuted for that by itself. It's always in connection with something with drugs or some other act. When you have something here where Hunter Biden had the gun for only 10 days, never did anything with it, it really does raise a question as to whether or not he would have ever been prosecuted, but for the fact he was the son of the president. As to the tax violations, even that raises some issues. Don't forget, during that period of time where he didn't report income, he was a drug addict. He later paid back all of the tax it was due and owing. Pretty unusual for the Department of Justice to prosecute somebody under those circumstances. Not totally, though, out of the ordinary. But again, it does raise a question as to whether or not, if he were not the son of the president, that he would not have been prosecuted for these tax violations. So there is some truth to that. We don't really know the answer to it, but it's not off the wall, put it that way.
I want to ask you about the aforementioned Kash Patel and some of the other appointments that we have learned about the past few days in the wake of Matt Gaetz withdrawing his name for consideration as the next Attorney General. Patel is the most recent to be the next FBI director. And the reaction that we've heard from even just the Republican side of the aisle has been remarkable. Not so much about Patel, Nick, but about the man who has the job now, the FBI director, Chris Wray. Chuck Grassley, who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee, incoming, said on X, Chris Wray has failed at fundamental duties of FBI director. He's shown disdain for congressional oversight and has not lived up to his promises. Fast forward to Sunday morning television, Mike Rounds, Republican senator, said this about Mr. Wray.
Chris Wray, who the president nominated the first time around, and I think the president picked a very good man to be the director of the FBI when he did that in his first term. When we meet with him behind closed doors, I've had no objections to the way that he's handled himself. And so I don't have any complaints about the way that he's done his job right now.
Nick Ackerman, what do you make of this? And is Chris Wray suddenly going to resign? Can Donald Trump fire him? I ask you this because you have real memories of the Saturday Night Massacre.
Oh, of course. No, he could resign, but I don't think he would, and he shouldn't. I think he should hang in there. The whole point behind Chris Wray being appointed to a 10-year term, Congress changed that a few years back in order that the FBI director would be out of the politics of the situation. The idea was that he'd be appointed by a president, could be removed only for misconduct. Certainly, there's been no misconduct on his part. Everybody says, except for a few partisans, that he has done a good job. And there's no reason to fire him. The whole idea is you want somebody as director of the FBI who is independent, is not beholden to the president, and handles his job in a way that makes the public feel that he's doing the right thing and he's not doing it for politics. Certainly, Christopher Wray cannot be criticized for doing anything that was political. He's done it by the book. He's been a good director. And I think putting somebody in who, again, is a total political hack, has no experience in this area whatsoever, other than to carry out Donald Trump's retribution, is really reprehensible.
Well, this is a 10-year term, right? That was the whole point, is that they would outlast any particular president. And I believe that comes from Watergate, which you are intimately familiar with here. Does Chris Wray just hold the line? What if he doesn't leave?
Well, I think he should hold the line, and he forced Donald Trump to fire him if that's what Donald Trump is going to do. I mean, the president does have the right under the statute to fire the FBI director. But the reason that he's doing it is really reprehensible. The idea that he wants somebody in office that's going to act to carry out his retribution against his political enemies is not the kind of person that you want as director of the FBI.
Well, I mentioned Chuck Grassley. He may not be a Chris Wray fan, but he's a big Pam Bondi fan. And he's walking her through the halls of the Senate today and this week ahead of her confirmation hearings. What is your thought on an Attorney General Bondi and the change that she would bring to the Justice Department?
Well, again, she is somebody that is not going to have any independence whatsoever. She's going to do whatever Donald Trump asks her to do. She was involved in his past two political campaigns and runs for president. Before he ran for president, Pam Bondi was investigating Trump University, but after she got a $25,000 contribution from Donald Trump for her campaign, she suddenly dropped that investigation. So again, we're looking at somebody who is not an independent actor, who is really going to be just an arm of Donald Trump's retribution campaign, and is not going to instill a lot of confidence in our justice system being meted out equally and fairly to everybody.
But after Matt Gaetz, now Kash Patel, some of the others that I could mention, she suddenly looks like captain of Team Normal, right, Nick? She gets confirmed.
Well, she may, but I think if the Senate does their job, they ought to be looking at this issue of independence. Are the people in the Department of Justice acting independently from the president, as all of these attorney generals have done since the time of Watergate? That has been the standard. That has been the norm. Instead, what Donald Trump has done is he's installed an attorney general. He's installed a deputy attorney general that was his criminal defense lawyer. His aide, it was the other criminal defense lawyer. And now you've got Kash Patel. What you have are all political appointments that are beholden to Donald Trump, that will essentially do whatever Donald Trump asks them to do. And why that is so dangerous is because Donald Trump has promised to perpetrate retribution on his political enemies. And the place that he can do it from and do it most easily is the Department of Justice.
Nick, we've only got a minute left. We started with the pardon of Hunter Biden. How many more will we hear from Joe Biden?
Oh, I don't think you're going to get much more. That was it. I mean, I think he came to the realization that he was putting his son in real jeopardy to leave him in the, confines of the Justice Department that is going to be run by Donald Trump. With those 4 or 5 appointments, I wouldn't trust anybody to get a fair shake from that department.
Nick Ackerman, founder of the law office of Nick Ackerman, former Watergate prosecutor. It's great to see you, and welcome back, Nick, to the conversation. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington on the fastest show in politics, with much more on the pardon and the transition. We'll get into these names that we heard over the weekend, including Kash Patel, with our signature panel coming up. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us right here on the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Stocks heading into the final trading month of this year in record territory. Supermicro computer shares are 29% higher after it said an external review of its business by a special committee of its board found no evidence of wrongdoing and that the company will appoint new top financial leadership. Cyber Weekend e-commerce sales grew 9% in the U.S. this year. That is up from 6% in 2023. Salesforce data show the average discount was 28%. That's down from 2% last year. Salesforce says the discounts this year really didn't meet expectations. The euro down now 0.8% after the far-right party of Marine Le Pen backed a motion to topple the French government. The party looking to dissolve the government that has the euro trading at 104.9 against the dollar. We do check markets for you all day long. Here at Bloomberg, the S&P 500 up 0.25%. NASDAQ is up about 1%, and the Dow is down 0.25%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.19%, and the 2-year yield at 4.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Back to Balance of Power now with Joe Matthew.
Amy Morris, thank you so much. With her eyes on Wall Street, we have ours on politics. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's the Monday edition, and we're glad to have you with us here as we unpack 4 days worth of news. Not only the Hunter Biden pardon, but much more news when it comes to the transition of the incoming Trump administration, much of which we were just talking about with Nick Ackerman. This White House has made pretty clear, and in the statement written by Joe Biden, reinforced today by Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, that this pardon may not have happened if Donald Trump had not been elected. Nick Ackerman said that flat out just now here on Bloomberg, the former Watergate prosecutor making it clear that if Kamala Harris had won, we wouldn't be having this conversation today, and it has everything to do with Donald Trump's approach to the Department of Justice, says Nick Ackerman, and the people he's choosing to run it and agencies like the FBI. That was a big moment over the weekend when Donald Trump tapped Kash Patel to be the next FBI director, a critic of the deep state, a loyalist at Mar-a-Lago, and one who could bring real change here to the nation's preeminent law enforcement agency, of course, depending on who you ask. Not everybody loves this idea. Some Republicans are concerned about Patel, his potential to run the agency. They're also concerned about the fact that we already have an FBI director in Christopher Wray, who would either have to resign or be fired by Donald Trump. Questions to Republican senators who will have to confirm so many of these names, including Bill Haggerty, the Republican from Tennessee, was asked about Patel on Meet the Press yesterday. Listen.
President Trump is entitled to name his appointees. That is exactly what he's doing, and I'm going to support this appointment. Kash has worked in national security. He's worked at the Department of Justice, and he's somebody that has been willing to uncover the wrongs at the FBI. He's the one that uncovered for the American public what happened with Russiagate. He's the one that can see through the fix here.
This is where we begin our conversation with our signature political panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. He, of course, partner at Stone Court Capital. She is political science professor at Iona University. And great to have both of you with us here following what I hope was a great and long weekend for both of you. Rick Davis, your take on this latest naming of names by Donald Trump. Washington has moved on from Matt Gaetz. We're talking about Pam Bondi now running the Department of Justice. But a Kash Patel who has vowed to dismantle the FBI would mean what for the agency?
Yeah, look, I think this is Donald Trump making good on his campaign promises. He said he was going to disrupt the FBI. He felt like the FBI has waged a 8-year war against him, starting with the Russia hoax, as he puts it, and going all the way through the Biden administration. So you can call it wanting to disrupt the government bureaucracy or retribution, whatever makes you tick. But I think it is important, the clip you played of Senator Haggerty, because Haggerty is a loyalist with Donald Trump in the United States Senate, but he's a reasonable, thoughtful guy. And the fact that he's willing to stick his neck out to blaze a trail for Kash Patel in the Senate means more likely that he is going to get through a confirmation hearing, assuming, as you point out, that there's a vacancy, because Donald Trump appointed the current FBI director, and he'll have to probably fire him in order to get a vacancy for Kash Patel. All of that is yet to be done, and obviously can't happen until he takes the oath of office.
Yeah, and the dismantling of Christopher Wray is apparently going to precede the dismantling of the agency. Look no further than Chuck Grassley, Jeannie Shanzano, the incoming head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who's walking Pam Bondi through the halls of the Senate here on X. Quote, Chris Wray has failed at fundamental duties of FBI director. He's shown disdain for congressional oversight and has not lived up to his promises. It's time to chart a new course for transparency, accountability at FBI. That's a pretty stark reaction when we hear the likes of Mike Rounds, for instance, saying that Christopher Wray, I believe he said, a very good man, he said, picked a very good man to be director when he did it in the first term. This was a Trump appointee. What did Christopher Wray do to deserve being fired?
Yeah, it's very unclear. And you hear that statement by Chuck Grassley. You'd like to know exactly what he's speaking to beyond the fact that Donald Trump doesn't like him now, even though he appointed him. And, you know, if you take what Chuck Grassley is saying at his word, okay, somehow Christopher Wray has failed and needs to be fired. Who is he appointing but Kash Patel, who has almost no experience and certainly doesn't have the temperament. This is somebody who has been going around talking about QAnon conspiracies and the fact that people in elected office and celebrities are engaged in a massive child sex trafficking arrangement, and that the deep state is trying to dethrone Donald Trump. You know, Joe, he writes children's books when he gets out of the White House. And these children's books are worth looking at, if just because they're stunning to the point of being comical if he wasn't being appointed to the FBI. They talk about trying to steal the deep state, to steal King Trump's crown. And they have villains like Hillary Clinton and Adam Schiff. I mean, the ridiculousness goes on. And it's not just bad writing. It's what he's talking about in these children's books and in the adult books that he writes. And so, you know, Chuck Grassley, okay, you don't like Chris Wray. What are you talking about in terms of Kash Patel that makes him at all qualified temperamentally to do this job and to be in charge of our national security? It's mind-numbing to hear this kind of nonsense.
The plot against the king, at least one of the children's books you reference, Jeannie. Kash Patel vowed, quote, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections, unquote. I'll read another quote to you, Rick Davis. Charles Kupperman, who supervised Patel in his role in the first Trump administration, says he is, quote, absolutely unqualified and untrustworthy, and goes on to say, quote, it is an absolute disgrace, unquote, for him to even be considered. What are these confirmation hearings going to be like?
Yeah, well, I have the utmost respect for Charlie Kupperman. He's a longtime national security official, you know, Republican, and knows what he's talking about. And look, this is what you get when you get Donald Trump. Elections have consequences. Donald Trump made it clear this is what he was going to do. Kash Patel is just an operative who will do Trump's bidding. I mean, anybody who thought this was going to be otherwise at the Justice Department didn't listen to Donald Trump every single day of the campaign. He's made all of his intentions clear. It's not clear when Kash Patel says he's going after people in the media what he means by that, what rules have been broken, what laws have been broken. He's still got a professional prosecution team in the Justice Department run by Pam Bondi, will be run by Pam Bondi, who had 8 years as a state attorney general and has a real track record behind her. So there is a adult at the gate, so to speak. But the reality is, the American people chose Donald Trump because he said he wanted to declare war on the FBI. And Kash Patel is the operative who will do his bidding. And by the way, if it's not Kash Patel, it'll be somebody just like Kash Patel. And I think that's what the Republicans in the Senate have started to figure out. They got to hide by opposing, you know, Matt Gaetz for the job as Attorney General. But now I think they're in the position of probably taking anybody he puts on the list.
Incredible. Just one more minute left here, Jeannie. When you consider the news over the weekend about RFK Jr., New York Times referring to his drug addiction, compulsive sexual behavior, and deep dives into conspiracy theories, or what we heard about Pete Hegseth from the New Yorker, from the Wall Street Journal, and his own mother, Penelope Hegseth. You see this throughout the letter, talking about him as a womanizer. Pam Bondi's just cruising to confirmation with all the rest of this going on here, right?
Yeah, she and Marco Rubio, no questions asked. Yeah, the email by Penelope Hegseth is just utterly devastating to read. And I'm trying to just wipe out of my memory RFK Jr. Did you see him in the shower, Joe, behind his wife while she was hawking her goods? And there he popped up. I mean, you couldn't write this as a made-for-TV movie and anybody would believe it or buy it. And yet here it all is. And of course, Jane Mayer in the New Yorker, a really devastating piece on Hegseth.
You said it. Yeah, another topless workout video, I guess, from RFK Jr. over the weekend. What is he, 70, James? He's 70. So I'm not putting any of those videos up. Jeannie, thank you. Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano, our signature panel here on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. To think we're talking about all this stuff. Can we get to the markets? Thank God Abigail Doolittle is standing at work. Because I'll tell you what, we're now in, of course, the final month of trading for the year. And we're going to be looking closely, with Abigail's help, for the rest of this calendar year at how the Trump trade is evolving, because we have seen quite a move, of course, since the election. And all I keep hearing about is a melt-up and a Santa Claus rally for the rest of the year. So let's get to Bloomberg Markets correspondent Abigail Doolittle. I don't know about the Dow here, but the broader market's looking pretty good, Abigail. So the melt-up continues.
The melt-up does continue. Right now we have the S&P 500 higher by about 0.2%, but that tech-heavy index, the NASDAQ 100, up more than 1% on the year. The S&P 500 up more than 25%. And going back a number of years, whenever the S&P 500 has had that kind of a gain from January through November, it has gained in December by more than 1%. So history suggests December will be kind to stocks. You were just talking about that Trump trade. So of course, some of the gain this year has to do with the Trump trade and the idea that the future administration will be good for the economy and markets. One piece of it today, which is really interesting, the dollar, the Bloomberg Dollar Index currently up about 0.6%. And over the weekend, President-elect Trump warning BRIC nations not to create their own currency. He's threatened a 100% tariff on them if they did. South Africa today said that they have no plans to do so. Some of the other BRIC nations, such as Brazil and China, have discussed the possibility of some sort of a single currency, but most experts and strategists, Joe, say that this is very unlikely, that king dollar is king dollar for a reason. And, at the end of the day, the United States is the lender of the last resort from the Federal Reserve, Treasuries. So at this point, that king dollar, that is a piece of the Trump trade. Right now on the year, up more than 5%. And most of this, very interesting, since the end of September, when a lot of the numbers started to shift in favor of President-elect Trump.
She's not just our Trump trade correspondent, she's markets correspondent. Abigail, thank you. Great job as ever. As I mentioned, we'll stay close to Abigail for the rest of the year to see how much further this can go. Abigail with us here live on Bloomberg TV and radio. We'll have much more ahead on the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew. This is...
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. JP Morgan Chase's global chair of investment banking, Jennifer Nason, is set to retire after nearly 4 decades at Wall Street's largest lender. Nason is set to join the board of Accenture, and she sits on the board of mining company Rio Tinto. Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta President Raphael Bostic says he is undecided on whether an interest rate cut is needed this month, but still believes officials should continue lowering rates over the coming months. Bostic says he thinks inflation is on a sustainable path to the Fed's 2% goal, despite bumpiness in the data. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.25%, NASDAQ up 0.9%. The Dow is down 0.2%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.18% and the 2-year yield at 4.19%. Political turmoil in France moved the euro lower today. Marine Le Pen's far-right party is backing a no-confidence vote against the government. The party looking to dissolve the current government in France. Euro trading at 104.9 against the dollar. Ken Griffin's Citadel is on track to defy a sluggish year for commodities trading across Wall Street, burnishing the hedge fund's image as a dominant force in the asset class. Sources tell Bloomberg Citadel's commodities business generated about $4 billion in profit this year, driven by natural gas trading, putting it on track to rival last year's performance. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Watching Wall Street for us as we cover politics live from Washington here on the fastest show in politics. Thanks for being with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. Coming up, our conversation with Hagar Shamali from Greenwich Media Strategies, watching the situation unfold in the Middle East, specifically Syria, where rebel fighters continue southward now after taking over Aleppo, an important development over the weekend that we'll have more on. We've spent so much time this hour talking about the transition, the Trump transition, with only 49 days to go to the inauguration, but who's counting? And of course, news daily on cabinet picks. We've spent much time talking about them on this program today. The assembly of the next Trump administration is a full-time obsession right now for Washington, D.C., and that includes the diplomatic corps, where it's a full-time job. Something I spent some time talking about with a veteran, British ambassador to the U.S., Kate Pearson, sat down with us at the ambassador's residence here in Washington.
I've met President Trump and I know him, and that's certainly extremely helpful. Not all the people will be the same. Some of them we know from the Hill. I've met Senator Rubio, I've met Congressman Mike Waltz, very fine people. And then we'll just try and make as many new relationships as we can. And what we really want are not just friendly relations, obviously, we want productive ones. We want to get to a stage where you can have deep conversations about the direction of policy, whether that's Treasury, foreign policy, defense, or health.
You mentioned Mike Waltz. You do have a special relationship with him, if I can use that phrase, following your time serving as UK ambassador to Afghanistan. How has that helped to create a bond between the two of you? What are your conversations about?
Well, the first thing we talked about when we first met was Afghanistan. I actually met the congressman's wife first. That's how I knew he'd had this very distinguished service in Afghanistan, Green Beret, extremely impressive. But of course, Congressman Waltz has also worked on the policy side of earlier Republican administrations. And we have lots of stories about different parts of Afghanistan where we've each been. I should explain, I was an ambassador. I wasn't in the military. He's had a much more adventurous time than me.
British ambassador to the U.S., Karen Pierce. You can see my full conversation with Ambassador Pierce coming up in the late edition of Balance of Power that starts at 5 p.m. Washington time. As we continue our conversation here with an eye on geopolitics, what's unfolding right now in Syria could have very important side effects for the future of the balance of power in the Middle East. What's happening in Syria, specifically in Aleppo over the weekend, caught a lot of people off guard. Rebel fighters pushing southward after taking over Aleppo in what is being framed as the most serious challenge to the al-Assad regime, which has been undergoing some very difficult times here, so it's saying a lot. To be specific, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the Islamist rebel group based in northwestern Syria, is driving this effort against Bashar al-Assad, and we wanted to spend some time with Hagar Shamali to talk about this a bit more. This is a real expert. You know her, of course, as the founder of Greenwich Media Strategies. We talk a lot about Mideast policy, but Hagar served as director for Syria and Lebanon as part of the National Security Council in the White House, and it's great to have you back, Hagar. How has this happened so quickly, and how real a threat is this to the Assad regime?
Sure. Well, Joe, first of all, thank you for mentioning that I was director for Syria and Lebanon, because it's really relevant to what we're talking about today, because I was there at the White House during the first 2 years of the Syria crisis. And this is a group I know fairly well. So first of all, we were all completely shocked. As you said, this is not something that was on the 2024 bingo card. It is a reaction to the weakness you're seeing on the part of Iran, Hezbollah for sure, and Russia. These are all Bashar al-Assad's allies. These are not only his allies, but these are the governments and groups that propped him up throughout Syria's civil war. In 2014, it looked like Bashar al-Assad was really close to losing because of the efforts of the opposition. And because Russia stepped in, first Iran and then Russia and Hezbollah, that is what ultimately propped him up and allowed him to retain power. And so the calculation on the part of HTS was clearly they see that his allies are all weak. Russia is distracted. Hezbollah has been, the head's been cut off. And so now would be a good time to launch this surprise offensive. And that's what you saw happening. But I had this reaction when I saw it happen. My reaction and analysis remains the same, even though several days have passed, which is that I believe this will be temporary. And the reason for that is that, first of all, Aleppo is a very important city to Bashar al-Assad, to the Syrian government. It is Syria's second largest city. It is also one of the more religiously diverse ones in Syria. It includes quite a large Christian group as well. Many of those Christians, some support Assad, some don't. Most of them just want protection from what they view as Sunni Islamist groups. And so it's an important city. It also has an international airport, by the way. This is a city that is important for Bashar al-Assad to retain control of. The reason they were able to take it was because of the surprise nature of the assault. But very quickly, you saw Russia step in and start bombarding strongholds in northern Syria called Idlib. That's where this group has its stronghold, where they control the area. And I don't think that they're going to step back. Even when these dictators and allies are weak, they are stronger together. And ultimately, the Syrian government, the Russian government, and Iran, they have airplanes, and these guys don't. And that is what is going to ultimately, I believe, not allow this group to retain control, to maintain control over this newfound territory that they've recently attacked.
Assad reportedly flew to Moscow following this new challenge to his regime. Hagar, are you surprised to learn that, and what will he bring home?
I'm not surprised to learn that. It's like he's visiting his big brother, frankly. Russia has been there for Syria since the very beginning. They share historical ties. Those ties go back decades. The Syria and Russia used to have cultural and student exchanges. It's a relationship that is very long in the making. And back when the Syria civil war started, the Russian government was there for Bashar al-Assad, and in 2014 actually stepped in with significant military support, with airplanes, and with air supporting them from the top, and bombarding what they said was a counterterrorism effort to target ISIS. But they weren't just targeting ISIS, they were also targeting the Syrian opposition. And so for Bashar al-Assad to fly to Moscow is for him to go there and say, hey, I need your help to wrap this up quickly. I can't fall back on Hezbollah. Back when the Syrian civil war was at its peak, Hezbollah, Nasrallah, the leader, now dead leader of Hezbollah, sent in his top men into Syria. Those top men don't exist anymore, and there's no leadership to even make that decision. Hezbollah at this point is reeling from the attacks by Israel. And so they're in no position to go into Syria and help. And so Bashar is going to kiss Putin's ring right now to ask for as much help as Putin can offer. And although Putin is distracted, and Putin himself is relying on other dictators like Kim Jong-un and Iran to support his effort in Ukraine, while they might be weaker alone, when these dictators unite, they are genuinely stronger together. I hate to admit that. I wish it weren't true, but it is. And so I do believe Putin is going to do what he can to support his buddy. And at the end of the day, the thing you have to remember is that Assad is proof that if you bulldoze your own people, he killed, the estimates are between 300,000 and 500,000 people. He killed 300,000 to almost 500,000 of his own people, and he still maintained power. He's not arrested. He lives in the lap of luxury in Damascus. And so he has no reason not to pursue that kind of strategy again with Russia behind him. And that's what he's going now to go do in Moscow, is plan that strategy.
Incredible stuff. The role the U.S. plays in this is what? Knowing that Joe Biden is winding things down. In fact, he just landed in Africa for a 3-day trip. You seem to think this is temporary. Will it be resolved by the time Donald Trump takes office?
For the U.S., the interests are a bit different because for the United States, our main interest is supporting the Kurds in northern Syria, ensuring that nothing happens to them. The Kurds were our strongest ally in countering ISIS in particular. They're a key reason why ISIS has not popped up again in northern Syria. The U.S., though, has had an inconsistent relationship, if you will, with HTS, with this group in particular that has pushed into Aleppo and is now moving more south. HTS at one point was sanctioned as a terrorist group. It was viewed back when I was in government, it was viewed as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but in Syria. And they have since changed. And so I don't want to paint them that way entirely. I also don't want to sugarcoat it for you. This is a group that has very conservative Islamic views. They say that they won't impose Sharia law, but they are a very conservative Islamic group. But they have since disavowed support for terrorism. They have disavowed their ties to terrorist groups. And many experts believe that maintains. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. I'm going to tell you that now because that is my experience in the U.S. government. But that said, that the U.S. does have a relationship with this group. Turkey in particular has a strong relationship with this group and has given them a lot of international assistance, which is what has allowed them to maintain control over the north of Syria. And so the United States at this effort, at this point, especially at the end, during this time when you're wrapping up a presidency, President Biden is traveling in Africa. You have Amos Hochstein, who's trying to broker another ceasefire deal in Gaza. That's going to be their focus. When it comes to Syria, the only thing they're going to be able to maintain is to try and to argue that the Kurds remain safe, that nothing happens to the Christian communities in Syria, and also that this group is aware that they shouldn't bite off more than they can chew, because what could happen is that Assad only retaliates with Russia and Iran behind him to crush civilians once again, and that is likely what he will do.
In our remaining couple of minutes here then, Hagar, turn the page to the next administration. What does a DNI Tulsi Gabbard inside the White House mean then for the U.S. relationship with Syria?
That's a good question. I had a hard time maintaining a straight face. Tulsi Gabbard, for viewers who don't know, traveled to Syria back during the Syria civil war, said that Bashar al-Assad was not an enemy of the United States. So then she tried to retract that. And she also rejected intelligence assessments that confirmed with high confidence that Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. I can tell you again, having been on the other side of that, when those chemical attacks happened, that the bar that the intelligence community must reach to make that assessment and to make that assessment with high confidence is a very high bar. So to have somebody who has publicly rejected the assessments of our intelligence community to now be leading that position, and on top of it to have shown a desire to be cozier or to look at Bashar al-Assad through rose-colored glasses is concerning, because that position is the one that briefs the president every day in the presidential daily brief and briefs the president on our biggest threats. And so you don't want that person viewing President Assad in any way as a rosy person, as somebody who ensures stability. And you also don't want that person just blatantly rejecting the assessments of our intelligence analysts who truly serve at the pleasure of the president, who are not partisan, and who do remarkable work. And so that's my concern with Tulsi Gabbard at the top.
Yeah, I can tell. Hagar, we're out of time, but do you think she'll be confirmed with everything you just said?
I think it would be tenuous, but I just don't think she's the most concerning for some of the other candidates. And I believe that that's where you're going to see, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard. She could pass. But There are others I think would not pass muster before her. So we'll see.
Too many plates spinning at once. Sagar Shamali, thank you so much for the insights. And great to have you back here on Bloomberg with Greenwich Media Strategies, former director, Syria, Lebanon, on the National Security Council, with the headline on the terminal, Israeli military attacking targets in Lebanon now. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
I am the owner of the AF Family Office and the company called Company I Limited. I also have a live streaming channel for startups. It's SG Trader, so anybody, we let startups to pitch investment community on our channel. I give them 3 minutes pitch. We publish their video on our channel, and everybody who is interested, please welcome to send me your video, and I will publish, I will roll for almost a month your video for all financial community. The channel is live, streaming live 5 days a week, from morning to night.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good Monday afternoon, everybody, live on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser along with Tim Stenevec. It is the first trading day of December.
Oh, already? Look at that.
Well, November wrapped up and it was a pretty good month.
Bullish one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, time flies when you're having fun. Gotta say, you see investors once again, as we are getting close to winding up 2024, they continue to double down when it comes to some of those large cap tech names. So we're going to get into that because we are seeing, or we have seen stocks kind of push towards some fresh all-time highs. Having said that, few headlines though, Tim, on the geopolitical front.
Yeah, the Israeli military says it is attacking targets in Lebanon. So far, we're not seeing markets move as a result of that. In the meantime, the president-elect, Donald Trump, out with a post on Truth Social saying that all hostages in the Middle East need to be released now, and says that if the hostages are not released prior to January 20th, 2025, when he does get back to being the president, he said there will be all hell to pay in the Middle East and for those in charge who perpetrated these atrocities against humanity. He said those responsible will be hit harder than anybody has been hit in the long and storied history of the United States of America.
All right, he said release the hostages now, finishing off that post, if you will, on his social media site. All right, well, keeping an eye on the markets. Hey, speaking though of, we mentioned big tech kind of leading the way on this Monday. Coming up this hour, we're going to get into the U.S.-China chip war. Kind of, Tim, the latest chapter.
Yeah. What's also? Did you talk about Intel?
Well, chips.
Okay.
On our mind in a big way this Monday.
That's a big one. Hey, another CEO saying bye-bye, in addition to Pat Gelsinger, perhaps being shown the door. We've got an update on the top job at the maker over at Jeep, SUVs, and Peugeot.
And then we've got the Billionaire's Baby Project that had snared dozens of women. This incredible deep dive by our Bloomberg Business Week team. All of that to come. First up, a check on that trading day, your top business stories. Here's Amy Morris in for Charlie Pellet. Hey, Amy. Hey, Carol. Stocks are getting a boost from tech at the start of a big jobs week. JP Morgan Traders Math places S&P near 6,300 by the end of this month. We do bring you the markets. We check them for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 up 0.25%. NASDAQ up 0.9%. The Dow is down 0.2%. The Russell 2000 index up 0.1%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.18% rather, and the 2-year yield at 4.19%. Super Micro Computer shares now 28% higher. It's been skyrocketing all day long after an external review of its business found no evidence of wrongdoing, and the company is set to appoint new top financial leadership. The company says it is looking for a new chief financial officer, chief compliance officer, and general counsel. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger was forced out effective yesterday after the board lost confidence in his plans to turn that company around. Intel shares have been higher all afternoon. Now they are little changed. Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares is stepping down sooner than expected as his views on the carmaker's future differed from those of the board and some shareholders. Shares of Stellantis now 6.3% lower. And going to Europe now, the euro is weaker after political turmoil in France. Marine Le Pen's far-right party backing a no-confidence vote against the government. The party is looking to dissolve the current government in France. That has the euro trading at 104.9 against the dollar. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec. All right, Amy, thank you so much. All right, let's kick things off on this Monday with one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg. And might we add, let the tech wars begin, or should we say kind of continue, Tim?
Yeah, this is the U.S. unveiled new restrictions on China's access to vital components for chips and AI, escalating a campaign to contain Beijing's tech ambitions, but stopping short of earlier proposals that would have sanctioned more key Chinese firms. So let's get to it. With us, we got a Bloomberg News U.S. economic and industrial policy reporter, Mackenzie Hawkins, joining us from the Bloomberg News Bureau in Washington, D.C. Okay, Mackenzie, lay it all out for us. What is being laid out by the U.S., and why is this happening now?
So what we got today is basically the third now annual update to a sweeping set of restrictions that the Biden administration has imposed on the ability of American companies to sell advanced chips and manufacturing gear to China. The goal is to prevent China from accessing and developing advanced AI and an indigenous semiconductor industry that Washington fears could lend Beijing a military edge. We saw initial restrictions in 2022 that affected both advanced logic chips, which serve as the brains of devices, think the chips made by companies like NVIDIA or AMD, as well as the tools needed to manufacture those chips. And every year since then, and sometimes in between, the Biden administration has tightened those controls, adding additional chips and components. And that's largely speaking what happened today.
But why now?
Like, just makes me think, okay, a new administration is going to come into the White House. Can they undo them? Can they change them? Can they make them tougher than maybe was expected, weaker? Like, help me out here.
So this campaign to kind of ring-fence Beijing's chip ambitions actually started under President Trump. So directionally, I wouldn't expect huge changes when he returns to the White House. But of course, Trump is a bit of a foreign policy wild card and known to be fairly transactional. So it's anyone's guess what his administration might ultimately do. The controls did come in a little bit weaker than some earlier measures that Biden administration officials had floated and some had pushed very hard for within the administration that would have applied sanctions to additional suppliers to Huawei, which is the tech firm at the center of China's industry and the center of U.S. attempts to control that industry. And it's possible that we could see a Trump administration take a harder tack against Huawei and also a harder tack against U.S. allies that have resisted joining the latest, toughest measures of the Biden administration's making. The key exemption in this rule is for Japan and the Netherlands, which are not subject to additional restrictions on ship-making gear. Both governments both countries are home to firms that are key in the semiconductor supply chain, Tokyo Electron and ASML, which face some restrictions on their access to the China market, but not as stringent as those faced by American companies.
Which, kudos to you, first of all, because your story that came out on Thanksgiving Day, you mentioned that these were expected, coming, could have been stricter than they actually are. And it really explains, Tim, why you're seeing names like Lam Research or AMAT or Arm Holding. They're among your top gainers in the NASDAQ 100 and the S&P 500
They
today.
were too on Friday as well. I got to talk about them thanks to Mackenzie's story that she did publish on Thanksgiving last week. Hey, Mackenzie, so that's where things stand when it comes to China. But what about closer to home here in the next administration? Because I'm curious about industrial policy under President Trump and something like the Chips and Science Act, and how you think that could change, or how you think industrial policy and spending on U.S. chip makers here in the U.S. could actually change under the Trump administration.
You and many other people, including the top executives at all these companies, would like to know. So the CHIPS Act is a $52 billion bet on revitalizing the American semiconductor industry. There's $39 billion set aside for direct manufacturing incentives, slated to go to the likes of Intel, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, Samsung, Micron, and also $11 billion set aside for research and development. The Biden administration has been negotiating with more than 20 companies in line to receive the incentives in the form of first setting up a preliminary deal, then going through months and months of due diligence, and then announcing a final binding contract. And we've just started to see some major ones come out in the past couple of weeks. And there was a big, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, no, finish your thought, please.
There was kind of a big scare late in the election cycle when Trump went on Joe Rogan's podcast and said this chip deal was, quote, so bad. He's questioned the need to spend billions of dollars on an unnamed Taiwanese company building in the U.S., which a lot of industry took as a reference to TSMC. And House Speaker Mike Johnson floated and then quickly walked back the possibility of a repeal of the CHIPS Act. Republicans' goal, as far as I can tell from sources on the Hill, is to potentially reform some provisions of the CHIPS Act that they see as quote-unquote woke, things like requirements for companies to build childcare facilities or consult with environmental groups as they develop their factory expansion plans. But in terms of a wholesale repeal, I think the CHIPS Act is at much less risk than other forms of Biden's industrial policy, like the Inflation Reduction Act, his signature climate law.
Hey, one last question, 30 seconds. So, bam, this just goes into effect, these new restrictions, in particular into China. They just go into effect, or what's the next step?
So different parts of the rule take effect at different times. There's a several-month lag for some parts. Others go into effect now. But generally, industry is going to try to kind of respond to these ever-changing regulations as they're announced. So you'll start to see effects from some companies today. ASML, for example, said that it doesn't see any impact on its 2024 business. So different parts of the rule affect different companies.
As I said, the SOX semiconductor, I think all 30 names were, I know they were up higher before, all of them, but continuing to still do pretty well in the trade. All right, going to leave it there. Hey, Mackenzie, thank you. Bloomberg News U.S. economic and industrial policy reporter Mackenzie Hawkins there in our D.C. News Bureau. We are staying in the tech and semiconductor space. There's a lot going on today.
Yeah, let's shift our focus over to Intel, because not a great look when you're out as CEO and your company stock rallies. And yet that's exactly what's going on with Intel today, as CEO Pat Gelsinger was forced out after the board lost confidence in his plans to turn around the iconic chip maker, adding to turmoil at one of the pioneers in the tech industry.
With more on that and an update on some other news in the high-tech world, including the latest on Supermicro. There's so much going on. That one's rallying big time. Joining us is Caroline Hyde, co-host of Bloomberg Technology here in studio. Caroline, let's first start with Intel. Felt like this was expected, and yet it feels like still a big deal for Intel.
Well, I will say, every time we had Ian on in the last 2 years,
Yeah.
Ian King, we'd basically ask him, Caroline, like, how much patience does the board have for this turnaround plan? And I guess we finally learned today they're out of patience.
They were out of patience, and actually saw that patience being strained in August when they had their numbers. The earnings were poor. In particular, they were showing losses at the manufacturing part of the business, the foundries part of the business. And Ian King, poor guy, I think he's meant to be taking the day off and had to come running back to report how
We've
all
been
of
monitoring.
this
We're
story.
like, he's on the terminal.
Yeah, and when that August number hit, we saw, in particular, one member of the board quit, Lip-Bu Tan, and with the frustration about the direction of travel coming from Pat Gelsinger. Because, look, this predates Pat coming in 2021.
To be fair, right?
To be fair, NVIDIA has been on AI accelerator path and GPU focus for a long time. But they just managed to miss this AI accelerator wave. The Gaudi offering that they have is likely to not meet their own internal $500 million per year revenue target. Compare that to the $100 billion that NVIDIA is bringing in, the more than $5 billion that AMD is managing to do. All of this, though, just shows that since Pat Gelsinger has been the leader in 2021, Intel's share price has plummeted 60%. NVIDIA's share price has rallied more than 800%. And Intel has managed to try and pivot, become more focusing on foundries, do like the opposite of AMD, which spun off Global Foundries and went fabless. Intel went back in. But there's a mixed reaction coming from the analysts today, because Citigroup is actually saying, and maybe this is why the shares have turned negative, we're now off by 1.7%, is that, look, Pat was the best guy for manufacturing. They just got rid of the foundries part of the business and kept Pat, rather than get rid of Pat and try and still cobble together the focus that he had in terms of getting into building chips as well for other clients as well as themselves.
I mean, it's amazing, right? Because Intel was up 6% at its highs, as you said, now down about 1.5%. So it just shows, like, Wall Street trying to figure out what this means. I mean, is it a Pat Gelsinger problem? Is it an Intel problem? Like, what is the way forward for Intel?
I think it's an Intel problem, many would say, is that over years, they were trying to do the biggest restructuring in 4 decades. Pat did come on with a very big, bold vision. Perhaps that was too big, too bold, too costly, even with government help, with all these CHIPS Act money coming at them to be able to build in Ohio, Arizona. They had to suddenly put on ice what was happening in Europe. And ultimately, the market ripped away from them, particularly when it came to AI. And I think just other areas of the market, plus their own clients. Like, remember, at the same time as NVIDIA building up strength in AI, Apple is busy making its own chips, and they're not making so much for their phones anymore.
If this wasn't a Pat Gelsinger problem, and he did have a few years to attempt to turn it around, you mentioned what happened with the share price, especially versus NVIDIA, then what can another leader actually come in and do to save this company?
And particularly at the moment when they're depending on insiders. Look, fair play, David Zinsner, the CFO's only been there a few years, but Michelle Johnston Holthaus, MJ is known, has been there for 3 decades. This is totally turning to people who understand the business but are not going to be a breath of fresh air anytime soon. Of course, we've got Frank Yeary saying he's going to take on the executive chair role and he's going to find a new permanent solution. Will that be from outside the business? Or will they turn to potentially starting to break themselves up? That was something Pat was very dead set against. Yes, he was going to be making money by spinning off different bits of the business, certainly particular investments that they'd made, but he wanted to keep it intact. What about offers coming from rival suitors?
Right. I mean, Qualcomm was interested, right?
Yeah, and then they went off.
And then they're
the
not
deal.
So,
but
not so into you anymore, kind of thing. Well, what kind of leader do we have any idea? I'm just curious what kind of leader Intel needs at this point. Like, I love the inside-outside, right? We've seen this with these incredibly
it's almost like
legacy companies.
It's almost like you're talking about Boeing right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm hearing this and I'm like just thinking about Boeing.
Right. How many times have we talked about this story that maybe it's time for fresh blood to come into a company?
And remember, Pat Gelsinger himself was kind of fresh blood because he came out from VMware. He'd been the CEO there. He'd left Intel. He was so integral to Intel in the 80s. He was like literally, designing the chips himself. He then left after serving a long time in a period as CTO as Intel to then go and get other experience. Then he came back and he couldn't change it around. If they go outside of, say, MJ, it's interesting hearing the narrative just from the statement this morning. They're saying we need the product people to lead the business at the moment. Well, that is MJ. So what are they going to do? Are they going to bring other product expertise from outside, or are they going to bring someone who can be a bit of a turnaround king or queen? We'll have to see.
Right, like operator, turnaround person versus somebody who really understands the products that need to kind of move Intel going forward.
To what extent does this turn into or continue a nasty cycle for Intel? If you're a potential customer or a customer and you're thinking to yourself, well, do I really want to buy it from a company that I see reported in the press such as this? It's going through this upheaval. There's, again, executive shakeup at the top. Does that turn into a terrible doom loop for the company?
I mean, time will tell, and I hate that sort of an answer, but what could help is the PC refresh. This is a man who's also staked his future on the AI PC taking off. And thus far, we've all talked about it, but not really known how it's going to affect our lives and not really bought the darn thing.
Right.
So will we actually see, I mean, this echoes the issue that Dell was having and HP was having in the beginning of the week.
Yeah, we talked about it with John last week.
Right. Yeah.
And he made the point that there are no apps for Intel, there are no apps for AI PCs yet. So it's like we just hear from executives talking about them, but there's nothing to show for them.
And so if that starts to tick up, if suddenly we are all addicted to generative AI, we do suddenly want to get a newer PC that we had bought just in time in COVID, and then we want to now get a new one, maybe that will help Intel. But then they're going to be leaning back into the PC side rather than trying to compete on the AI accelerator side, which is really the bit of the market that at the moment everyone's getting into.
Yeah, it's kind of like this identity crisis for a name that was just so, associated with anything to do with the semi world. Hey, before you go, we got to ask you about Supermicro Computer. I think it's the #1 gainer in both the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100. Independent review, no evidence of misconduct. This is a company that's had so many twists and turns this year.
Oh, I mean, on the highs, absolutely caught up in the AI hype because they are a competitor with Dell. They basically put NVIDIA chips within their servers and sell them out to clients. So Supermicro done phenomenally well. But then came the concern about, well, no one wanting to audit them, then getting worried about financials, not putting their 10K out, potentially being kicked off the NASDAQ.
Right.
Now they've got a new auditor. Now they've got a new CFO, Chief Compliance Officer, General Counsel. They're trying to steady people's nerves that, look, we've got different oversight here of the business, and we are going to be able to stay listed within the NASDAQ, which I think for many is the key.
I'm surprised to see reaction today just because when EY resigns, it's not a good sign. And I'm like, well, did they get something wrong then? And this new auditor's different in some sense? Like, they're obviously sending a different signal, but, someone's not in the right here.
Or whether EY were frustrated with the leadership and now they're changing up the executive leadership and showing that they're going to have a different governance structure going through. But everyone wants to love this stock because it is so integral to the AI hype cycle. So maybe it's just been so beaten up that people are willing to buy back in. But yeah, we'll see what BDO USA has to say about the numbers when they eventually file them.
Not one of the big accounting firms that typically audit S&P 500 companies.
But I know BDO. Like BDO are significant, and you're not going to hang your hat on. I would have thought, they're taking a big risk here, and I'm sure they want to show the proof in the pudding.
Yeah. Well, I've got to say, investors certainly buying in. Stocks up 28% so far in today's session. Caroline, thank you.
Thank you.
So appreciate it. Co-host of Bloomberg Technology. Catch her on Bloomberg Television at 11 a.m. Wall Street time every day. Coming up, billionaire and the now disgraced tycoon's baby project. Do not go anywhere. You're going to want to hear every morsel of the story.
2:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Cyber Weekend e-commerce sales grew 9% in the U.S. this year. That's up from 6% last year. Salesforce data showed the average discount was 28%, which is down from 2% last year. Salesforce says this discount has not quite met expectations for the year. The euro now down 0.8%. This is after the far-right party of Marine Le Pen backed a motion that would topple the French government. The party is looking to dissolve the current government. That is the euro trading at 104.9 against the dollar. Supermicro Computer shares 28% higher after it said an external review of its business by a special committee of its board found no evidence of wrongdoing and that the company will appoint new top financial leadership. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.1%. NASDAQ up 0.8%, and the Dow down 0.25%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.18% and the 2-year yield at 4.19%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. And now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec.
It is indeed. All right, Amy, thank you so much. All right, not sure exactly how to set up this story from our Bloomberg Business Week team, other than it is an incredible deep dive by Bloomberg's Jackie Davalos and Sophie Alexander. It's about someone who probably is about to become maybe a household name, and not for a good reason. It's a former billionaire, now disgraced tycoon. His name is Greg Lindbergh. He built a network of egg donors and surrogates and is now facing as many as 30 years in prison. There's some legal different charges. There's a lot to unpack here. So let's get to it. Bloomberg News technology reporter Jackie Davalos joining us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Jackie, every time I turned around with Tim, he was reading the story and he's like, leave me alone, because it was just unbelievable. I do feel like we're watching a little bit of a streaming series, reading your story. Who is Greg Lindbergh? How did he and this story get on yours and Sophie Alexander's radar?
Well, he might actually be a well-known quantity if you've been a Bloomberg reader and listener over the last couple years. He made his name in the insurance business, and not really for a good reason. He built his wealth by amassing this empire of insurance companies that then got him in trouble. He was convicted of bribery and some fraud charges. He actually went to jail a couple years ago for the bribery charges. He wanted to basically get some preferential treatment in North Carolina, where some of his companies were based. He got caught for it by the FBI and went away for a couple years in prison, but got out on kind of this procedural issue with the jury instruction. So basically, he was able to kind of, come out as a free man all the while this was happening. And even before he went to jail, he had these aspirations of having upwards of 50 children. And what he is known for kind of in the business community really had nothing to do with what he was doing in his personal life, but what we were able to uncover, Sophie and I, she is a reporter that knows billionaires, knows how they think. And I really knew kind of the fertility clinic side of things. I had done some reporting on a company called Kindbody last year, and this came on our radar as a kind of a combination of those two reporting threads. But we had no idea just how deep his baby project really went.
Well, that IVF firm that you mentioned is one of the two that's implicated in this scheme. Let's back up for a second. We're going to get to sort of the intricacies here, but why would he want 50 kids? And why would he want to do this through IVF? Because there's some custody issues here that you detail in the story.
That's right. He has 3 children with an ex-wife that he had, when he was married. And there was kind of an ugly custody battle there. And when we sat down with him to interview him, he was fairly forthcoming about the reasons why. He kind of vacillated between, well, I don't really want to lose kids in a custody battle, which is why I wanted to have them on my own. He wasn't, hiding the fact that he used a network of egg donors, but then again, he wasn't totally forthcoming about how many were involved. Another reason he stated was that he wanted to preserve civilization, this responsibility to populate the earth. And we recognized a lot of those threads from, especially Sophie Alexander's reporting on Elon Musk and other billionaires who are kind of obsessed with this kind of pro-natalist way of thinking. And Greg Lindbergh's goals really echoed that goal as well. And, the other thing that kind of came up is that, I don't think a lot is known about what it takes to build a family in this way. We typically think of like a couple walking into a fertility clinic that can't conceive, not necessarily a guy who's basically trying to have as many children as possible on his own. And yeah, there's the issue of custody. He shares some children with this woman who kind of served as a recruiter for him, but she's not allowed back in the United States. So 8 children are currently in his care in Tampa while he's sitting in jail waiting to be sentenced for these larger crimes. And that's really what's at the core of the story is, where will these children end up? What happens to them? And ultimately, did doctors know that this was a possibility?
I don't even know where to begin. It's just kind of, as I like to say, a wait what moment. I want to go back to, you talked with Lindbergh earlier this year. Tell us about that conversation, what you wanted to know, why he agreed to do the interview. What was, I'm just curious how you got him to talk to you.
Well, he has a pretty open presence online. If you Google greglindbergh.com, he talks a lot about longevity. After his legal saga, he's currently waiting to be sentenced, but at the time, over in the spring, he was posting YouTube videos about kind of his new project, which is all about wellness and how to get younger and stay young. And he posts a lot about these things, and we were interested in that. I had gotten a tip about kind of his baby project separately, but it really seemed like these two things were linked. And so he wanted to talk about his longevity company called Longevity Labs, and had a phone call with him. Then he invited us down to Tampa, where he lives. And this is where we really got to see him in his element. He came in with security guards. He, has this kind of very intimidating quality to him. His eye contact was extremely intense. And at first he was fairly open about how he built his family through IVF, but started to kind of clam up a little bit once he almost like heard himself kind of talking about the unorthodox nature of it. And we were pretty forthcoming that like, hey, this sounds a lot like this other guy that we've written about, Elon Musk. But that's kind of what got I think it cracked it open for us that this was real, and that there were certainly a lot of women that, he didn't want to talk about, but we had to kind of piece those pieces together because it's an incredibly important part of the story, which is the exploitation involved. And while this might have been, a goal of his, there were women whose lives were impacted by how he carried this out.
So let's talk a little bit about that, how he carried this out, who was involved, how Instagram was used, and what women who ultimately did donate their eggs to Lindbergh were told versus what they ended up getting and what he ended up doing.
In the first stage of the baby project, Greg Lindbergh really targeted blonde, blue-eyed, green-eyed model types. There were matchmaking services that he used. There were kind of boozy parties that he threw on his huge yacht. There were, reality TV stars, Netflix stars. I mean, very, very like a specific type of woman that he had in mind. He had this kind of obsession with Aryan looks and the German quality to things. He himself obviously has red hair, but he really wanted to have, blonde, blue-eyed boys, and was super specific. And for some of these women, many were vulnerable. There was one who was not, from American. There were several actually who were Eastern European, vulnerable in many ways because, they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. He promised them money, promises that they would be in the child's life, that they will build a home together, and was kind of manipulating them in a way that, if they didn't go through with this procedure, that he would cut them off basically and cut the relationship off. There were other women that had no idea that, who he was. His recruiter / fiance, she was going on Instagram and basically finding these women and offering them hundreds of thousands of dollars to donate their eggs. And they thought, wow, my eggs are just going to go to this, nice family who can't have kids. And they weren't told the truth about Greg Lindbergh, his legal troubles, and the fact that he was sitting in jail while some of this was happening.
Jackie, your story is definitely about Lindbergh and everything that kind of happened around him, but it's also about, as you guys, so well write, the booming $10 billion fertility industry here in America, and you guys have been writing a lot about this industry. It continues to grow. There's demand out there. We know that. Tim and I talk about it a lot on air. It also shows, though, ultimately the lack of transparency over it and kind of rules governing it. Is that kind of the other side of the story? Because I think we're listening and saying, okay, some of this happens. Tell us kind of where this breaks down, where the law's been broken potentially.
This is the big picture. Greg Lindbergh might go to prison, likely will, but anyone else can pull this off because a lot of this was actually legal. There is very little regulation when it comes to the fertility industry. It's this honor system. They're a self-regulated industry, essentially, that, has guidelines that doctors purport to follow. Clinics say, these are the guidelines of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, ASRM. It's a trade group that represents doctors across the country. And they say that we follow these guidelines, but no one's following up on it. No one's policing it. The government has largely stayed out of regulating fertility because it's really politically fraught. As we know, with reproductive rights, just kind of at the core of this debate. And fertility is usually thought of as a way that it's like a miracle for couples that haven't been able to have children. But as our story shows, depending on what your intentions are and how wealthy you are, it can also be used as a tool for exploitation. And two of the clinics are really well known. Kindbody acquired this other Chicago clinic that started it, but it also continued after they acquired them. HRC, it's a major fertility network on the West Coast. A doctor who's treated celebrities was the one that Lindbergh preferred, and he was open about this, and we were able to kind of piece together some of the concerns that clinic workers actually had, specifically at Kindbody, with what they were doing. And that takes a lot of courage for people who kind of see this playing out, and I think what our story does is, at the end of the day, these guidelines are there for a reason, but, no one's really following up to see if doctors and clinics are actually following them.
Hey, Jackie, quickly, and then I'm going to just encourage everyone once again to go and read this story. It's the most read on the terminal today for a reason. I could not put it down. He participated with you to a certain extent, but then cut off communication with you and the reporting team behind this. And then what happened?
And there's still an ongoing claim of defamation. He alleged that we were interfering with a relationship with one of his surrogates. Obviously it's a touchy situation for him, and we were pretty forthcoming about the direction of the story once we really cleared up the facts. But right now he's sitting in a county jail in North Carolina waiting to be sentenced. He was denied bail multiple times this last month. And we're not really sure where his story will end up, but we stand by our reporting and hope that folks out there can read it.
It's an amazing read, unbelievable. Jackie, thank you so much. I'm really glad we were able to go through it with you. Jackie Davalos, she's Bloomberg News technology reporter. This story by she and Sophie Alexander of Bloomberg News. Check it out at Bloomberg.com and also on the Bloomberg terminal. Jackie, thanks.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, Hezbollah has claimed the first strike against Israel since a U.S.-backed ceasefire plan came into effect. That was less than a week ago. It prompted Israeli officials to vow a strong response in the most serious threat so far to the truce with Lebanon. With more on what we know, Bloomberg News U.S. National Security Team Leader Nick Wadhams joins us from our D.C. bureau. Nick, I was confused to see this headline because, like, we see in the story here, less than a week ago, we saw a ceasefire agreement between these two countries. What happened?
Right. Well, I mean, that's really the issue, and this is something that happens every time there is a ceasefire, or frequently when there is a ceasefire, there are violations of it. And the question is then, at what point do you say, okay, the ceasefire has essentially collapsed and no longer applies? What we gather so far is that we have not drifted into that territory. The U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said today that rocket attacks went from hundreds to basically zero, and then dozens of airstrikes by Israel to 1 or 2 per day. So what they're saying here is there has been a dramatic reduction in violence, and that's what matters, and the ceasefire still holds. But what it does tell us more broadly is that this is very tenuous. You had President Biden come out and say that the ceasefire had been achieved, a lot of concern about whether it will hold, and concern that things will only continue to escalate. One possibility, of course, is this is just sort of a show of strength by the two sides. Things will quiet back down, but certainly not looking good for the broader prospects for that ceasefire at the moment.
Nick, why this dance? Rather than ceasefire means ceasefire. So help me understand. I know that it's always complicated when I feel like anything in the Middle East. But why this dance rather than, okay, ceasefire, this is a step forward?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, but the big issue is that so much time and effort and energy went into establishing this ceasefire, and the really important thing for certainly the U.S., but also for those caught in the conflict, is that the violence has dramatically reduced. So there's a question of, okay, you have the ceasefire, you don't want to immediately just declare the ceasefire is dead, which means, okay, that everybody would then have to go back to the negotiating table. And if you're looking at a pure numbers game, it's like, okay, well, we have a monitoring system in place. There may be some violations. We do not deem those violations to indicate that the ceasefire has totally collapsed. I mean, and when you look at some of the language, it seems like the two sides also have an interest in keeping the ceasefire in place. Hezbollah, for example, targeted Israel in a specific area, an area that's still contested, and they framed their response as a defensive response to what they said were recurrent violations by the Israeli side. So what they're saying is this is much more of a defensive action, and they have not gone back on the offensive. Of course, big question is whether Israel will see things the same way. But at this point, the big question is going to be, is there escalation where we would get to a point where we would say, listen, the ceasefire exists in name only? So far, that's not quite yet the case.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the area that's in contention right now, Nick, because we saw after that ceasefire deal was signed last week, or reached last week, I should say, we saw people moving in Lebanon, moving back to that area because they thought it would be safe to do so. So there's some concerns there.
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of the imagery we really saw of people coming back to their homes in Lebanon, in a lot of cases, that was actually in Beirut, in the capital, where people had fled because Israeli airstrikes had really hit some parts of Beirut, particularly southern Beirut, quite hard. And so people were coming back in because there was a feeling, which has largely held, that the ceasefire would apply and you wouldn't start to see those strikes again. The area really in question is this sort of strip of land around just south of the Litani River, and so this divides Lebanon and Israel, and this has been a sort of hotly contested area for quite some time, and it's believed that Hezbollah has been there for a long time, and there was a feeling that Israel could then pull back, and that would also allow Hezbollah to pull back. So that's really where you're seeing a lot of the contested the violations. We have not seen major violations restrictions apply, to Beirut, which I think if you did see that would indicate a real collapse of the ceasefire.
What are we hearing out of our own security operations, our own intelligence out of the White House in regards to that, or we haven't heard maybe much of anything yet?
Well, I mean, the big thing is, the U.S. put, as I mentioned, a lot of time and effort and, frankly, credibility into getting this ceasefire. So it is very much in their interest to try to keep this thing from escalating much farther and keep it in place. This is something that President Biden really wants to keep in place through the end of his term in hopes that then it would put pressure on Hamas and Israel to come to a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. So it is very much in their interest to keep this thing going. They do not want this to fail. So what you can expect to see in the next couple of days is going to be a ton of pressure on both Israel and Hezbollah by the U.S. and other mediators involved in this action to really tamp things down and not let these tit-for-tat strikes get any worse.
Tim and I are going back and forth because we're like, there's one more thing we need to ask you. And I feel like when you think about pressure, I think about Tim, the president-elect.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump posting just at the same time we learned that Israel is actually doing this. He posted about the Middle East hostages on Truth Social. He said there will be all hell to pay if the hostages are not released by January 20th. And he called on the hostages to be released in the Middle East right now. How does this complicate things or not complicate things?
Well, it's very interesting because the hostage situation applies to a different situation, which is in the Gaza Strip, and so that.
But is it that different?
Well,
it's a several front war.
Sure, that's true. Though the issue there is that a threat like that would not necessarily apply to Hezbollah because they don't have any hostages, though they have worked in support of Hamas. But I mean, you're right in the sense that when President-elect Trump issues a threat like that, it certainly causes people to stand up and take notice and question, okay, what's going to be coming down the pike? It's that sort of this idea they have, escalate to de-escalate. The question is this bluster, or is this just something that he's going to actually take seriously and potentially launch some sort of strike once he becomes president?
All right. Well, as we said, it's kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It always feels like, but a lot of moving pieces to this. Nick, you're a gem. Thank you so much. Nick Wadham, Bloomberg News U.S. National Security Team Leader, and you can read the latest. Just check it out at Bloomberg.com or, of course, on the Bloomberg Terminal.
I'm pulling up ADRs of Stellantis right now, down about 6.5% as we speak.
We're going to get to that in a moment.
Yeah, we are. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. First up, though, check the day's trade and top business stories. Amy Morris standing by in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. J.P. Morgan Chase's global chair of investment banking, Jennifer Nason, set to retire from the bank after nearly 4 decades at Wall Street's largest lender. Nason is set to join the board of Accenture, and she sits on the board of mining company Rio Tinto. Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta President Raphael Bostic says he has not decided on whether an interest rate cut is needed this month, but still believes officials should continue lowering rates over the coming months. He says inflation is on a sustainable path to the Fed's 2% goal, despite bumpiness in the data. And we do check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.25%. NASDAQ up 0.9%, and the Dow is down 0.2%. Russell 2000 is up 0.1%. The 2-year Treasury yield is at 4.19%. Slow down, Amy. And the 10-year yield is at 4.19%. The political turmoil in France has the euro moving lower. Marine Le Pen's far-right party is backing a no-confidence vote against the government. The party looking to dissolve the current government in France. The euro now trading at 1.049 against the dollar. Ken Griffin, Citadel is on track to defy a sluggish year for commodities trading across Wall Street. Sources tell Bloomberg that Citadel's commodities business generated about $4 billion in profit this year. That was all driven by natural gas trading, which puts it on track to rival last year's performance. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec.
Amy Morris, never slow down, man. You're right on it. Don't slow down. You got it. You got it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, we got to talk a little bit about the auto industry.
Yeah, let's talk about the auto industry. Stellantis ADR is down about 8% today. At one point, now down about 6.6% on the news that its CEO, Carlos Tavares, is leaving. Yes, it's a surprise, Carol. It leaves the maker of Jeep SUVs
Monday.
and Peugeot. I know, Gelsinger, Tavares.
What's going on?
I don't know if I can keep up.
Indigestion after Thanksgiving?
Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. Let's get the story, because we got the details. We're going to head to Detroit to Bloomberg News auto reporter Gabby Coppola is standing by. A surprise, Gabby? It was a surprise to us, a surprise to you who follows this so closely?
Yeah, I think it was a surprise how quickly it happened. You know, we all knew that this was coming. The board, I mean, Tavares kind of barely survived a challenge back in October. And my colleagues and I had reported that there was already a succession search, underway. But I think the fact that things came to a head so quickly and that he stepped down like he did, yeah, that was a bit surprising. Happened very quickly.
Tim was suggesting maybe Pat Gelsinger could do it, but
Hey.
maybe it's too soon to start making CEO jokes. We don't want to go there. Listen, we respect that there's companies going through changes or marketplaces like the auto industry, right? All in on EV. Got it. Wait a minute, we're slowing down. Maybe people want hybrids. Like, it's a kind of crazy world. So in terms of Stellantis, Gabby, is it Stellantis' problem or an auto industry or a U.S. auto industry problem?
Well, it's definitely not just the U.S. And, I will say that for sure it is a challenging backdrop for any auto CEO right now because of what you mentioned, the regulatory changes, a new president in the U.S. going in a different direction. They overshot on what demand for EVs would be like. I actually think Stellantis' strategy may be okay in that department because they've really committed to this multi-energy pathway. So they say they can pivot to hybrids and, other things. But really, this is more of a Stellantis problem. This was a Tavares leadership problem because they've done horrible in the U.S. market and they've been struggling in the EU as well, where their competitors have been doing much better.
And he was kind of on the way out, right?
That's what I'm saying. I mean, they had a shock profit warning this fall that really, I think, hurt the confidence of Wall Street in the CEO. So things were already not good. But ultimately, I think Tavares, he had a reputation of being this amazing cost cutter. He was a protege of Carlos Ghosn. He worked for him at Nissan. And that trick worked several times in the past for other companies he led. He turned around Opel, he fixed Peugeot. So I think he kind of tried to do that same trick on Stellantis, and then it just didn't work. And then when it wasn't working, he failed to change course and really adapt to the changing environment, especially here in the U.S. post-COVID. Everybody was making money when there was a shortage of cars and prices were high, but then he couldn't adapt to when that situation changed.
Yeah, so Gabby, so let's talk about that very briefly. We only have about a minute left, but when you drive by a Jeep and somebody has that big sticker that says it's a Jeep thing on the Jeep.
Yeah.
In this case, it actually is a Jeep thing, right?
Yeah.
Because he killed off the cheaper Jeeps.
Yeah, well, but now they're coming back. So now you've got this new guy, Antonio Filosa, in the United States. He's an Italian, worked under the former legendary CEO, Sergio Marchionne. And they have already repriced all the Jeeps for 2025 to be cheaper. They've been working down inventory. I think they are working very hard here in the U.S. to improve. I think they're moving in the right direction to improve things in the U.S., but they got a lot of headwinds. And of course, they have to find a new CEO because now they're just being run by a committee chaired by John Elkann, who is the chairman of the company and the scion of the Agnelli family that founded Fiat in the 1890s. So they need a new CEO. That's the first order of business.
It's kind of like a good time, bad time to be a CEO, right? There's CEOs that are being kind of pushed out, and then there's wanted
I can
CEO.
see the compensation on the Bloomberg terminal. I would say it's never a bad time to be CEO in 2024 or 2025 because compensation is just through the roof, no matter how good of or bad of a job you do. Just throwing it out there.
Negotiate your out package right on the way in, Gabby. That's how you do it. All right, good stuff. Gabby Coppola, she is auto reporter at Bloomberg News. Check out all of her work. You can see it on the Bloomberg. All right, coming up, everybody, private markets.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, Carol Master, Tim Stenivek, live here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. So there was a story that, on our read-in, caught our attention. It was from our Bloomberg Opinion team. It was about how banks will lose billions of dollars in business to their private credit rivals. It is just one topic that is likely to come up at the upcoming Bloomberg Intelligence Credit Conference that's happening in just a few days.
Yeah, later this week. Let's hear more. With us in studio is Bloomberg Intelligence Global Director of Credit Research, Joel Levington. Joel, first up, credit markets, the dominant theme today, the dominant story. What's top of mind for you?
Yeah, well, I think really if you're talking about the investment grade sector, it's really all about policy. You know, like what is going to throw off bonds and valuation. You know, bond spreads are in the 99th percentile, so super tight. Right? If you look at yields, it's 75%, so it's still kind of tight. So what's going to throw that off? What's the trigger for 2025?
Many things could, right?
Sure. So on the policy side, you're talking about deregulation or corporate tax rates, tariffs, maybe acquisitions, right? And how do you play those kinds of themes in the year, I think will be a good driver of where spreads go.
Joel, do you anticipate that people are going to be, like the folks that are kind of giving you the big macro picture, that they're going to commit? Because I do feel like we just came off of the Schwab Impact Conference in San Francisco, and everybody's like, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly how the policies of the new administration.
And this was like before certain tariffs had been tweeted about, or,
right?
You know,
like
so
you know, will it be as extreme as some anticipate? Will it be less? Congress has got to weigh in on stuff. Is it still fair to say a lot of questions out there?
Yeah, and I think these nuances are going to be the game changers as to what might work. I think in terms of tariffs and policy changes, I think the one thing that everybody feels similarly is that financials will win, right? If you're talking about acquisitions, they make money off of the work of acquisitions.
They'd love to see M&A come back in a big way, right?
And if you see regional banks merge, then that tends to be positive for credit because they tend to be all equity deals. So that's the one space where I think people tend to be very bullish right now. But on other sectors, you know, I cover the autos. How do you think about autos? It might be a game of less worse. In energy, it's going to be nuanced as to what sectors might be winners or losers. So I think it'll be very interesting to hear everybody's thoughts this Thursday at 12 o'clock here at Bloomberg, right here at 120 Park.
I'm assuming our reporters will be writing stuff off of it, so we'll be looking for some stories.
Wait, not happening at 731 Lex?
You know what? We've had it. This is our 9th year of having it. We've had it at 731 Lex.
I'm doxing us, by the way. So that's where we are.
There's a person with his name on the side of the building that happens to be having an event at the same time.
Oh.
And that put us into 120 Park. I'm just very proud to be part of his organization.
Well, fortunately, that's not too far from us, so we can actually head down there if we want to.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the folks who are going to be there today, or I mean, later this week.
Yeah, well, we have some great
today.
ones. We were actually just talking about Kathy Jones. She'll be there. Megan Graper from Barclays is terrific. Our own Ira Jersey is going to be there. If I'm looking at some of the high yield names, Matt Mish from UBS is terrific. Megan Robson from BNP. Winnie Caesar from Credit Sites. So I think we have in total about 15 different guests. All are constantly on radio and TV. And of course, the keynote is going to be Matt Brill from Invesco, who always has some great insights. So we're looking forward to hearing what Matt says.
Tell me about private markets. We led in with a Bloomberg opinion piece, and I just feel like Tim and I have gone to Milken several times, and it does feel like the only thing people want to talk about is private markets, and in particular private credit, that just kind of seems growing. But what are the implications for big banks?
Yeah, and I think not only does it impact how you think about their market share, I think it also, if you're talking about the high yield markets, they have become kind of the lender of last resort now, right? There's another source of liquidity that's ample and sizable that is there for companies that are in stress and might need to access the private market. So I think it'll be terrific to be able to see some of the people there. I believe we have like the global CIO from BlackRock Credit as one example, Anna Arzov, we talked about earlier, and then the CFO of Blue Owl Capital. Now, Dave Havens, who's going to be moderating the panel, was just telling us that there's $2 to $4 trillion worth of money just sitting there for deals. So I think, you know, going back to
private
policy,
credit funds,
yeah. So just going back to, is M&A going to happen? It certainly could, but that doesn't mean banks are going to get all of it, right? Private equity and private lending will certainly play a big role in where that's headed in 2025.
Is the new administration a constant layer over every conversation that's planned? I mean, I'm just thinking back to the event that we went to a couple weeks ago, Schwab Impact.
All over everything.
It was everything.
Yeah, you know what I would say for investment grade bondholders, yes, I think that policy is. I think when you come to high yield, I think it's more of a game of valuation versus technicals. There has been a huge bid up as markets are willing to take on more risk to be in the riskier credits. Will that bid still stay there as demand, to support valuations and where they are? I think that'll be the bigger issue more than just policy for these smaller companies.
I feel like so many people have been talking high yield this year, right? It's just really kind of having certainly a good moment at this point.
Tremendous year.
Yeah. All right. We'll see whether it continues. Good stuff. Look forward to it. Look forward to some of the news coming out of it and some of the conversations coming out of it. Joel Levington, he's Global Director of Credit Research at Bloomberg Intelligence. Such an important part of the marketplace to watch in terms of the health of the overall financial picture. So looking forward to that.
Hey, speaking of the next administration, if you're sticking with us on Bloomberg Radio, on Bloomberg Business Week, we got a great story today. It's the Bloomberg Big Take. It is one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg Terminal. It's a roadmap through Trump's tariff realities and his trade war drama.
I'm looking forward to that. Also, how Elon's MAGA embrace is upending the meaning of owning a Tesla, and on this Cyber Monday, are you shopping?
My humanoid robot is shopping for me.
Why does that not surprise me? All right, stick around, everybody. This is Bloomberg.
CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Linda Kenyon. The White House is defending President Biden's decision to pardon his son Hunter. CBS's Cami McCormick reports.
Spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre on the president's flight to Angola referred to the president's statement about his decision, saying enough was enough.
There were political opponents who were very clear and very vocal about going after his son.
And she said the president believed that would continue. She did not explain why Mr. Biden had ruled out a pardon earlier or why he made this decision now.
CBS's Katrina Kaufman has reaction from the Trump team.
He's calling this an abuse and miscarriage of justice. His son, Don Jr., also posted and said that they really knew this was going to happen. They think that Biden was just waiting until it didn't affect Democrat electability.
Hunter Biden was scheduled to be sentenced this month on federal gun charges and federal tax fraud. President-elect Donald Trump wants to install loyalist Kash Patel to lead the FBI. CBS's Scott McFarlane has reaction from Capitol Hill.
Some of Trump's most ardent allies in Congress, Florida Senator Rick Scott, issued a supportive statement unequivocal about Kash Patel. On Face the Nation this weekend, Ted Cruz indicated support for Kash Patel. But we're not seeing this parade of statements championing Kash Patel from the Republicans in the Senate.
Patel has advocated purging the FBI or even using it to go after Trump critics. Israel's military says it is currently striking terror targets in Lebanon, where a fragile U.S.-brokered truce with Hezbollah began last week. The announcement comes after an earlier Hezbollah attack targeting an Israeli military position on the Israel-Lebanon border. In parts of the Great Lakes region, yes, snow shoveling is a familiar sound, and some of the area got several feet of snow over the weekend. Meteorologist Craig Allen says more is on the way.
Massive amounts of snow continue to fall across portions of the Great Lakes, although the bands of the heaviest snow seem to be shifting somewhat as the pattern is shifting west-northwesterly.
A dictionary is honoring a new slang term. CBS's Deborah Rodriguez spells it out.
The Oxford English Dictionary has taken a cue from young people and all that time spent on social media to select its word of the year.
Hi, are you suffering from brain rot?
Let's see if you have brain rot. Oxford defines it as supposed deterioration of a person's mental or intellectual state, particularly stemming from overconsumption of trivial online content. The company says usage jumped by 230% over the past year.
This is
free.
Both teams have been fined after an ugly skirmish that followed a top college football game. CBS's Steve Kathan reports.
The Big Ten Conference has fined Ohio State and Michigan $100,000 each for the player brawl Saturday that followed the Wolverines' 13-10 win in Columbus.
Ugly scene. Incredibly ugly scene for a beautiful rivalry.
It was seen by millions on Fox TV after one of the biggest upsets in the college football season. Police got involved and reportedly used pepper spray. It began after a Michigan player. No individual fines or suspensions will be handed out. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
Aaron Rodgers will remain the New York Jets starting quarterback, despite speculation the team could bench him in what has been a disappointing season. The interim coach says he believes that Rodgers does give the Jets the best chance to win. Linda Kenyon, CBS News.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we are less than an hour away from the closing bell on this first trading day in the month of December. Man, we are getting ready to wrap up 2024. It's like...
What happened?
I don't know. That's just kind of how it happens. Carol Masser, Tim Stenevec, live in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Hey, coming up, we're going to get a roadmap from Trump's tariff realities and trade war drama. There's a lot of stuff we've already talked about a little bit when it comes to U.S. chips and semiconductors, but there's what's talked about, and then maybe actually how it goes down.
And also, what happened during 2017 to 2021?
Is it a fair playbook to think about?
Well, you got to talk to the folks who helped implement them, and we're sort of on that side.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what our team did. So we're going to get an idea from Sean Donnan in just a few minutes about what exactly that could look like.
Well, speaking of how sometimes Donald Trump maybe flip-flopped a little bit in terms of policy, talk about flip-flopping Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah, I love this story. This is such an interesting story. Talks about people who, hated Teslas until they saw what Elon stood for politically, and then vice versa. The folks who said, wait a second, I don't want to own this thing anymore now that Elon Musk has aligned himself with the president-elect. It's kind of interesting.
Right? Politics and a brand, right?
Yeah.
But this one, it kind of goes back and forth here. It's also Cyber Monday, in case you missed Black Friday or Small Business Saturday.
Joe Matthew, he's like, we're still calling it Cyber Monday?
Can we just say, just shop a lot, people? It's just shop a lot month.
That's what the companies who sell stuff want us to say.
Well, we're going to talk robots and AI with Amazon's Vice President of Global Operations. They definitely see a lot when it comes to this, so that's all coming up.
All that and more coming up over the next 2 hours. First up, though, a check on the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Amy Morris in for Charlie Pellet. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim. Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta President Raphael Bostic says he is undecided on whether an interest rate cut would be needed this month. He still believes officials should continue lowering rates over the coming months. Bloomberg's Mike McKee has more on Bostic's remarks. Bloomberg's Michael McKee. The Fed's next meeting is December 17th through the 18th. We do bring you the markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.25%. NASDAQ up 0.9%. The Dow is down 0.2%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.19% and the 2-year yield at 4.19%, almost 4.2%. U.S. manufacturing activity shrank in November by less than forecast as a gauge of new orders moved into expansion territory for the first time in 8 months. France's government risks collapse after a motion to topple the government. It would have painful economic and financial consequences. The euro is now down 0.8%, trading at 104.92 against the dollar. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thanks so much for that update, Amy. Do appreciate it. Well, as I mentioned, it is today's big take. It's a most read story on the Bloomberg terminal. It is a roadmap through Trump's tariff realities and trade war drama, or about as much of that roadmap that's actually possible, Carol.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting. Bloomberg Economics has really mapped out a plausible scenario for what lies ahead when it comes to tariffs and trade, though it's admittedly a plot sketch without a high degree of confidence, given the unpredictability of Trump himself. As I went through the story, I felt like there was always the caveat, like, but, you know, we're not quite sure how it might play out.
It's a Bloomberg exclusive based on a scenario mapped out by Bloomberg Economics and conversations with officials who helped deliver Trump's first-term trade policy. The story by Sean Donnan of Bloomberg News and Anna Wong of Bloomberg Economics. Sean is a Bloomberg News senior economics writer. He joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. So, Sean, tell us exactly how you were able to map this out, who you spoke to, and the conclusion that you came to.
Yeah, so look, as you guys were stressing, there's a lot of caveats in this, right? This is not a GPS. This is not the Google Maps directions to grandma's house. But we do know what we went through last time, and I was lucky enough to cover the trade wars the first time around. I know a fair few people who were involved in that. And when you talk them through, one of the things you get reminded of is there were all the public tweets, there were all the threats that came from Donald Trump the first time around, but behind that were a whole lot of people and a whole lot of process that went on to kind of deliver these tariffs. You know, we sometimes think of these China tariffs that went in the first Trump administration as a kind of one-time thing. It actually took, 2.5 years to roll them out in phases. That's how long, you went from the initial investigation being announced to the kind of the final deal in January of 2020. And when you talk to people who were involved, one of the things you hear from them is that process is still going to be there. All of these executive authorities that Donald Trump has, he has these levers he can pull, but each of them sets off a process. It doesn't immediately impose a tariff. It doesn't immediately change the nature of imports or exports. It all takes time to adjust, and there is a process. And look, there are also politics in this town. There's going to be a lot of senators and congressmen on the phone, both to their constituents who are complaining about tariffs and the impact on their business, and also to the White House, relaying those complaints over time.
Okay, so I guess this sounds so fair because I feel like, Tim and I recently did an investment conference, and everything in terms of potential Trump policies and moves by his administration, whether it was tax policy, tariffs, trade, everybody was kind of in a wait and see mode to see how it ultimately plays out. Having said that, Sean, I do feel like this time around, we've seen the president-elect, Donald Trump, in his second term, not consecutive, obviously, but he's been out there front and center very fast, naming people, and it does seem like he is looking to hit the ground running. So I wonder if there is potentially something different around in terms of policies and what we might see. I don't know. How do you game that out?
Yeah, sure. Look, one of the features of the first administration was it took a long time for him to get his team in place. So Robert Lighthizer, who ended up as the U.S. Trade Representative and the real implementer of his tariff agenda in the first term, wasn't confirmed by the Senate until May of 2017. And it was really, so that was almost 6 months into the administration. This time around, it should happen quicker. But, the Senate still has some power over those nominations. It's still going to insist on holding confirmations. That still takes time. And then, when you go to actually act on policy, you can have all the ideas, you can issue the executive order, but that sets off a process, and that process still takes time. That's kind of boring as an answer. I think we will get a lot of drama. We will get a lot of late night tweets or posts on Truth Social, and those will kind of alarm markets and so on. But we also have to keep in mind that there is this process, and that's where we get to this plausible scenario.
So let's talk a little bit about the role that executives who run companies here in the U.S. may have. We've seen the role that Tim Cook had in at least navigating as head of Apple during the first Trump administration in the way that he was able to work with the Trump administration. Elon Musk is now alongside the president-elect. We don't know what their relationship will be moving forward, but they seem certainly pretty close right now. How has Donald Trump reacted to what he hears from executives and the way that they do or do not like policies that he is thinking about?
Yeah, look, Donald Trump in the past threatened to put in place tariffs that would have hit a lot of Apple's goods coming from China. And so Tim Cook got on a plane, flew to Bedminster, New Jersey, and had dinner with the president and presented a compelling case for how that would hurt Apple in its competition with Samsung over smartphones and the like. You're going to see the same thing all over again. And this time around, we have this kind of unique position that Elon Musk is in. Elon Musk has huge business interests in China, for example. He was building a factory in Mexico until earlier this year when they kind of put a pause on that. He obviously has a global business that relies on supply chains that go into all parts of the world, and tariffs would affect him. He has, in the past, sought exclusions from tariffs that Trump has put in place before. So we should see that again. So we're going to see all of that. But you also have to keep in mind that even when tariffs go into place, and I was just on the phone before coming on here with the CEO of a family-owned company that does production in Mexico. They recently bought a company in China, actually. They have supply chains that go into Bangladesh and Vietnam. They also do a lot of production here in the United States and in Canada as well. And he's trying to figure out right now exactly how his business is going to be impacted by tariffs. And he says, look, at 10%, I can probably adjust. At 25%, things get hard. If it's anything above that, and he says he's hearing as much as 200% from some of the advisors that he's paying, his business completely changes, and it would be incredibly disruptive. And that's the other side of this thing that we sometimes forget, is that one of the reasons Donald Trump did not pull out of NAFTA, which was something he ran on in 2016 when he got into office, is that very quickly his advisors and CEOs came to him and said, that would be incredibly disruptive to the U.S. economy. It would mean slower growth here. It would mean higher prices for consumers. And that would be a bad thing for the U.S. economy. And so he reacted by deciding to renegotiate NAFTA instead. We're going to see the same conversations all over again.
Yeah.
Lots of business people coming to him and saying, look, be careful what you do.
Well, all right, I just got about 45 seconds or so left here. I mean, Sean, bottom line, if markets don't like something in terms of a policy when it comes to tariffs, is it safe to say, the president-elect, who will then be president, will be watching very carefully? Or is there a voice that's going to be really close, near and dear to him, that's going to help guide him no matter what? How are you guys thinking about what you need to be following to figure out kind of where he goes from here?
Yeah, look, he's still filling out his team, and we still have a few seats to wait and see who he puts in it. But, Kevin Hassett, who he nominated for the National Economic Council, is going to be filling a role that Larry Kudlow had in the first administration, which was really trying to placate markets.
Yeah.
We saw him out there in front of the cameras a lot in the first term, but also talking to the president and relaying concerns he was hearing from the markets. Scott Bessent is going to be doing the same as Treasury Secretary once he's confirmed. I suspect Howard Lutnick, who is Commerce Secretary, has been given a role looking over trade, is going to be hearing from a lot of his friends on Wall Street when tariffs go into place. So, there's going to be a lot of feedback from markets and a lot of adjustment.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Sean, thank you so much. Sean Donnan, our Bloomberg News senior economics writer, with this incredible story out there. And speaking of the markets, I just want to mention a headline crossing. Federal Reserve Governor Chris Waller saying he's inclined to vote for another reduction in interest rates when officials meet later on this month, though data due before that could make the case for holding them steady. We have some big data, jobs data on Friday.
Do you know what time it is in Beijing?
It's like 3 in the morning.
Yeah, 4:17 in the morning. We'll tell you why next.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. This Business Flash is brought to you by River Spring Living. If you are looking for a vibrant community for your mom or dad, River Springs Senior Housing has options that might be the perfect fit. Schedule a tour and see what makes life at River Springs special. Visit riverspringliving.org. Cyber Weekend e-commerce sales grew 9% in the U.S. this year. That's up from 6% in 2023. Salesforce data show the average discount was 28%, which is down from 2% last year. We check the markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.3%. NASDAQ up 1%. The Dow is down 0.1%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.18% and the 2-year yield at 4.17%. Intel's board forced out its CEO and the stock rallied, and it's pairing those gains now. After gaining as much as 5%, shares are now 1% lower. Chief Executive Officer Pat Gelsinger was forced out after the board lost confidence in his plans to turn the company around. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, you can subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. And now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Amy. Do appreciate it. Well, some news out of China today. We talked about it earlier with Mackenzie Hawkins, that the U.S. is unveiling these new restrictions on China's access to vital components for chips and AI. It escalates this campaign to contain Beijing's tech ambitions, but it stops short of earlier proposals that would have sanctioned more key Chinese firms.
All right, so curious about all of this and what our next guest has to say. He's Ben Harburg. He thinks a lot about this region and the latest when it comes to investing in China. Ben is founder and portfolio manager at Core Values Alpha. His team, by the way, manages the CVA Great China Growth ETF, ticker is CGRO. This year, up just shy of 10.5%. It is down 20%, though, since October 7th. Ben joining us from Riyadh. You're always somewhere, it's the wee hours.
So you're either staying up late or getting up super early for us.
What is it? Are you just
Wait,
like,
what's going on in Riyadh?
Are you looking? Yeah, exactly.
Are you on vacation? Is this a
there?
work trip? What's going on?
I'm speaking at the World Football Summit here.
Why?
Oh, that's pretty cool.
I own a soccer team in Spain, so I talk a lot about. So my side hustle is running soccer teams.
How much time do you spend doing that versus managing the fund? I mean, can you do both? Obviously.
You can do both if you delegate well. I probably spend 5% of my time on football related.
How much do you want to spend on soccer?
Oh. If China can turn the corner, then I'll be all in on that. But no, I would love to spend more time. We'll slowly edge towards that as my net worth creeps higher, I guess.
So Ben, is it easier to attract investors to invest in a sports team or soccer team than it is to get investors to invest in China? I ask you this, and I know we talk about this a lot. I mean, your fund is about $7.3 million in assets under management. So I'm assuming you would like for it to be a lot more. So help me around here.
We have over $2 billion on the private side. So okay. This is, this public strategy is newer for us, and it's a bit of a trial balloon, and we'll be adding new products into it shortly in the next couple months. So it's kind of a process of seeing what sticks to the wall on the ETF side, but we've obviously done well on the private side. I'd say today it's probably easier to get people to invest in sports. Sports are hot right now, European football particularly, because the valuations are so low relative to their U.S. peers. It's a highly inefficient industry, and it's also one that's really fun to get involved with. And so You've seen some mega funds raised over the last few years in this space.
In terms of the private investors, as you said, over, I think, $2 billion you said, is it the similar investment strategy in terms of what you're trying to do? This fund in particular, you look for those kind of tech-enabled companies in Greater China, the mainland, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Is it the same type of investing, or is it something different that you're doing on the private side?
It's obviously much earlier stage, so it's venture and growth investments. So companies that are maybe Series C, Series A, and then some pre-IPO stuff, and then obviously ETF is all public.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, now that we've sort of established the grounding stuff here, let's talk a little bit about opportunities that you see, because we actually haven't had a chance to speak to you since I don't want to call it re-election, but since President-elect Donald Trump won back earlier last month. How does that change the outlook for China? Because on one hand, he talks incredibly tough about China. He implemented tariffs that then the Biden administration kept, and he's talked about increasing tariffs on China when he takes office. How are you thinking about all this?
I think you should be short-term bearish and long-term, optimistically or cautiously bullish, let's say. And I think that's because you're going to hear a lot of headlines and you're going to see a lot of news about very high tariff numbers and a whole slew of China hawks brought into the administration. And so I think that'll mean really tough dealing and a very high bar set for the Chinese that they're going to have to deal with as they grapple with attracting investors back to the market. But I think in the long term, you can be slightly bullish because Trump is a businessman. He's pragmatic. And there are things that can be done from the Chinese side to assuage some of the issues that he cares most about. He cares about the reindustrialization of America, reshoring jobs, protecting American industries. And there are things that China can give up in an effort to appease that and to support that. And when they do, that can lead to a much more pragmatic dynamic in the relationship rather than what you face with the Democrats, which is a very intractable dynamic where there's a whole slew of issues that they care very much about that China will never be able to reconcile and overcome. And therefore, it just kind of draws on indefinitely as a kind of shell game.
Hey, Ben, one of the stories on the Bloomberg today, we talked about the Chinese 10-year yield dropping past the key psychological milestone of 2%. It was at a record low. Traders essentially kind of ramping up their bets that authorities would ease monetary policy further to bolster the weak economy. When you think about China, what is more important to making it more investable for investors? Is it the U.S.-China relationship? Is it China figuring out its real estate overhang, or is it something else?
The key number for us is consumer behavior in China, the key indicator. Everything else kind of is affected by that. So when geopolitics affects stock prices and valuations, they undercut people's home, kind of their savings, their portfolio, and therefore they consume less. And likewise, if real estate prices are falling and homes are going at lower prices than they were previously, again, that undercuts people's confidence in the market. And so all these measures to stabilize the property market, to assuage some of the geopolitical tensions, albeit very, very minute, are an effort to get the Chinese consumers back to the market. Because the only way that China grows and the way that it survives and the way that it performs the way people were hoping it would, several years ago, is to establish it as a domestic consumption market and enable it to absorb a lot of these products that they're exporting outward, because they simply cannot afford to continue to run trade deficits with every country, or trade surpluses, if you're sitting on the Chinese side, with every country around the world.
Ben, a few years ago, if we were talking to you, the conversation we'd be having is, China's going to overtake the U.S. as the largest economy in the world, and it's going to do that very soon. That narrative certainly has shifted, but do you think that does end up happening eventually?
I think the numbers would say it does. And just, again, the efficiency of the Chinese economy is still quite low. There's a lot more that can still be done to improve their efficiency. They are very well positioned in what I would call kind of the fifth industrial revolution, right? Or, with all the types of key hardware and even